Good evening, everyone. It's Tuesday, February the 20th, 2024. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting. I'm going to call to order our meeting at 6:30 p.m. and we're going to start with a moment of silent reflection. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Moving on to our land acknowledgement. The municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe traditional territory, covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope, and learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Moving on to item 2, disclosure of pecuniary interest. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? I note that none were received in advance of tonight's meeting. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 3, correspondence. Item 3.1, Town of Cobourg regarding management of 310 Division Street, an opportunity for community integration. I'm going to just say a few words about this correspondence. I trust that everybody's had a chance to read it. So, as you know, I've been providing some updates on 310 Division Street here at our council table to reflect the developments that have been happening at the county level. So the County of Northumberland has entered into a partnership with Transition House on the relocation of local shelter services and wraparound support at 310 Division Street. And since the building was purchased and this agreement has been entered into, there's been extensive community consultation that's occurred, as well as quite a lot of presentations to County Council and letters expressing some concerns around the safety and operations of 310 Division Street. It is the position of County Council very much to support 310 Division Street and everything that it stands for. It is a necessary improvement in modernization of support services and sheltering services for this community. That support is unwavering. However, there have been concerns raised about what is the balance of roles and responsibilities in relation to 310 Division Street, not on the social services side of things, but in terms of the structure, responsibilities, and outcomes from the collaboration that I mentioned, and in particular, the costs and roles and responsibilities that the town of Cobourg would have in helping to manage 310 Division Street. And so this correspondence comes to us to support Cobourg in a motion that would then be presented at the county level to enter into an implementation agreement between the county and the town of Cobourg to be very clear about those roles and responsibilities that I just mentioned. And I think the way that I see it is that if this kind of shelter and support service was coming into our community, our municipality, I do think we would want to clearly know what is the responsibility of county around the delivery of social services and what are the potential costs and roles and responsibilities that we would have as a municipality. And I don't think that that has been clearly delineated yet. And it's definitely one of the key themes that's coming through the community consultations and from the letter writing from the residents of Cobourg. And I do believe strongly that the support at the community level would increase with the assurance of having this kind of implementation agreement. And there is precedent for having this kind of implementation agreement. If we look to our neighboring county and in terms of the agreement that was struck between the town of Whitby and Durham Region Social Services. So that is just basically the overview of this correspondence. I know that the motion that is before you is to receive it for information, but I'd like to actually elevate that to something a little bit more action oriented, and even to think about at this council table whether or not in making a request that the county enter into some kind of implementation agreement, that might set a precedent, a template, a model for us as we move forward, should we have the opportunity on joint projects with the county here in our own community. So that is the overview. I'm very happy to answer any questions or comments about that. Yes, Councillor Less.
Sorry. I know there's no cost information outlined in the report, but are the county thinking they're going to carry the capital cost and leave the operational costs to the municipality?
No, just for clarification, of course, the real estate cost is the real estate cost, the capital cost. The cost for the delivery of the social services would be county provided, but we're talking about costs that are in relation to policing, fire, garbage, security, all the things that have been issues traditionally in Cobourg with the now transition house. Citizens are concerned about whether or not some of those things will continue with 310 Division Street, and concerned about the fact that they do not want to be taking on the costs of that.
Well, I don't know how much municipal bylaws will take precedent over landlord-tenant acts going forward, because this is going to be private property and it will be under that auspices. So I think it's valid what they're asking, but I don't know if they're going to be able to get answers.
So what we're really discussing as you bring it to sort of the elevated status is, lobbying county to have a template for the lower tiers, so that when they do bring a service or a social service into that community, that there's a very clear outline as to what they're responsible for and what we're responsible for. Is that what I'm catching? Yeah.
I would say that maybe it's a two-step process. One is to actually look at this correspondence and actually take the step of, considering supporting this resolution explicitly. So not just accepting it for information, but also then the second step that you've mentioned. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about issues adjacent to this at the Intermunicipal Task Force on Housing and Homelessness, and I've also had a conversation with Deputy Mayor Nicole Beattie from Cobourg about this. And I think the issue of the financial costs that are borne by lower tier municipalities in responding to the homelessness crisis is certainly something we've been talking about a lot at the task force. So I do have an appreciation for that sentiment from Cobourg, that they are disproportionately impacted by this centralized approach to social services, and which is exemplified in the new transition house plan for 310 Division. And while the services at this new facility will be benefiting the most vulnerable community members from all 7 lower tier municipalities, there is potential impact that will be borne only by residents of Cobourg and potentially at a cost to Cobourg taxpayers. I would argue, though, that vulnerable Cobourg residents are also more positively impacted, and perhaps have a disproportionate access to those services as compared to vulnerable residents of other lower tier municipalities in the county who have to leave their home communities and support networks and travel to access the services they need. So there is also a benefit to Cobourg of these services being located there, but there is definitely a real cost. So, on that basis, I do lean towards supporting the mayor's ask that we endorse this, because I think that it should be seen as part of a larger support for the notion that as lower tiers, we have a stake in this game. These issues impact us and they have a cost to our taxpayers, and we should be at the table to be part of those discussions. And I definitely think the municipality of Cobourg is a legitimate stakeholder in that facility and how it's managed. And I certainly echo the mayor's sentiment that I would like Port Hope to have a seat at any table about a facility like that that would be both benefiting and potentially having other impacts to residents of our community.
Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So through the chair, the concern that I have with this letter, as Councillor Todd has expressed, it's a lobbying effort to the upper municipal tier. So my question to Cobourg would be, why are they not including the other municipalities to be asking for the same at the same time?
Just to clarify, Councillor Mink, they are. Other municipalities have been approached with a similar ask.
That letter doesn't say that, though. That letter is asking for.
Yeah, for us, but as I understand it, this is very much an active discussion that's happening right across all the municipalities.
So do we have a letter asking the other municipalities for the
Not
same?
not on file, but as I understand it, there is a similar ask happening across the board. But I think the bigger issue is that as we are doing more joint projects with county, in particular in the area of social services and housing and addressing the needs of the most vulnerable right across the county, there is the idea that to date, a lot of that work has been happening in Cobourg because it is very central. But moving forward, there's no guarantee that the county will not want to do joint projects or other kinds of initiatives across the county. And I think it behooves us to think about getting something in place so that we know moving forward what is the division of roles and responsibilities and costs, because I can tell you that from the residents that we've heard of from Cobourg, there are legitimate concerns, and it's not about people not wanting to have this kind of service, these kinds of supports, or being really sympathetic to the homeless, but that they really have concerns about how this plays out in their own neighborhood. So I think it's one of those situations where we have to think about, if this was happening in Port Hope, would we want the support from other parts of the county to ensure that there is a fair division of roles and responsibilities and costs?
And to my point, I agree with what you have said. I just think that if they are asking for that from the other municipalities, the support, then why not at the same time make sure that we're representing all municipalities so that no one gets left behind at this time? There are other municipalities that do have a lot much fewer resources within Northumberland County that doesn't have that same voice, and this is the time to bring that forward. I agree there needs to be the connection between the upper and lower tier, so why not bring it together now?
Councillor Mickey, if you look at the correspondence on page 2, it's actually there's an address to the Township of Alwick-Haldeman, Municipality of Brighton, Township of Crammy, Township of Hamilton, Municipality of Port Hope, and Municipality of Trent Hills.
And that is asking for support, but not willing to come together and represent collectively at the same time. To me, it seems like an offer of tokenism, that they can say we have the support, but I don't feel like Port Hope is getting the representation at this time. And there is an opportunity to bring everybody together under one umbrella with the same ask at this time.
So we've had this, just to clarify, we've had numerous discussions about this at the county table, where you know that all of the municipalities are represented through mayors. And I think that this is just another channel to ask for an agreement that to date does not exist. And it's certainly, from my perspective, very much in line with the delegations that we've heard at the county table, the correspondence that we've received, and some of the community consultations that are ongoing. And I do think it's an opportunity to press for a precedent that would then also benefit us moving into the future. Councillor Todd.
Maybe as a question of procedure, and appreciating that you may not have the answer, but if you do, I'll take it. Is what we need to do then as a council to give direction to you as our representative at county to be able to bring that forward? Is that a helpful procedure? I don't know the answer to that.
No, I mean, absolutely. That's a terrific question. I mean, it can be one of many things. One is that we can symbolically say that we are supporting this resolution. You can also direct me to speak to this at our next county council meeting, which just happens to be tomorrow, at which this issue will be discussed. And I can certainly bring forward, maybe our interest in seeing whether or not a template can be developed across the county for all municipalities when there are any joint county municipal projects moving forward.
May I, so on that, could we defer this until you have that conversation with the other mayors? Because I just don't want to be in the position that we receive, I don't know how many municipalities, 7 of these letters asking for the same support from each municipality when it could be done in all at once, if that makes sense.
It's certainly one of the options that's in front of us. Can I pass I'd like to at this point pass the chair to the deputy mayor, and I would like to put forward a motion on the table.
I was not prepared for that, Madam Mayor, but happy to step in.
Well, I can't do a motion if I'm chairing. So I would like to, based on the correspondence and the discussion, put forward the following motion: that council receive the correspondence from the town of Cobourg dated February 2nd, 2024 regarding community integration opportunities with respect to 310 Division Street, and that council endorse the resolution by the town of Cobourg requesting the county of Northumberland and Transition House establish an agreement with the town of Cobourg to address the management of 310 Division Street in Cobourg, and that a copy of this resolution be circulated to the county of Northumberland and all Northumberland lower tier municipalities. I'd be certainly happy to make an amendment based on Councillor Todd's recommendation that we also take the opportunity to ask for the opportunity to develop a template for any further joint agreements with county municipalities moving forward on similar issues.
Okay. And the clerk, you got the full wording, including the addition?
So I'm just going to read it out loud, and then you can just let me know if this is what you were aiming for, Madam Mayor. So I got the first part of it, so that council received this correspondence from the town of Cobourg regarding the community integration opportunities, and that council endorsed the resolution by the town of Cobourg requesting that the county of Northumberland and Transition House establish an agreement with the town of Cobourg to address the management of 310 Division Street in Cobourg. And then the addition, I believe, was that Mayor Henkivsky address Northumberland County Council with respect to an ask for an opportunity to create a template for any further joint agreements moving forward. Is that for lower tier? Yeah. Okay. Lower tier. And then a copy of this resolution be circulated to the County of Northumberland and all Northumberland lower tier municipalities.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Less. Is there any further discussion? No, we'll call the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? The motion is carried.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Okay, moving on to our next item under correspondence, 3.2, Township of Greater Madawaska regarding support of Bill C-310 and amendments to subsections 118.06.2 and 118.07.2 of the Income Tax Act, tax credit for volunteer firefighters, and the deputy mayor will introduce the matter.
Thank you. I elevated this correspondence after conferring with Director Williams about whether this was something that was of concern and of interest to our fire department here in Port Hope. And Director Williams confirmed that it is. Director Williams, would you like to speak to it briefly?
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to thank you again, Deputy Mayor, for bringing this forward. This is a bill that's being taken under consideration, and a number of municipalities have shown their support through the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs. Basically, we're looking at raising the minimal personal amount for volunteer firefighters from $3,000 to $10,000 to assist them in offsetting costs with performing their duties as firefighters for our municipality. So, a number of municipalities have stepped forward. And we're looking for both the support from the provincial and federal government to do that, to amend the tax laws to support our firefighters here in Port Hope. So thank you.
Thank you. And just on my part, I think, I would like us to support this because we know that this, how important our volunteer fire department is, and how difficult it would be for us if we weren't able to have a volunteer fire department. We obviously can't afford to pay for a professional fire department of full-time firefighters, and so anything that we could do that makes it a little bit easier and compensates our volunteer fire department a little bit more, I think that's something that's in the interest of this community. So I do have a motion, an alternative motion to put forward, but which I can do if there's after any questions or further comments. Then the motion I'd like to make is that council receive the correspondence from the Township of Greater Madawaska dated January 22nd, 2024 regarding amendments to the Income Tax Act, and that council endorse the resolution passed by the Township of Greater Madawaska in support of Bill C-310 and amendments to subsections 118.062 and 118.072 of the Income Tax Act, tax credit for volunteer firefighters, and that council directs staff to circulate a copy of this resolution to all Northumberland municipalities, the Association of Fire Chiefs of Ontario, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and to our MP, Philip Lawrence.
I'm chairing. So that's moved, and can I get a seconder? I symbolically second it. So that was my Annie Hall bubble. Councillor Adam is the seconder, and any discussion? Councillor Lass.
You said Philip Lawrence. Is it a federal? It is. Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments, discussion? Okay, then we'll take the vote. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 3.3, Prince Edward County regarding province to expand the lifespan of fire apparatus, specifically pertaining to the replacement of fire trucks due to insurance requirements. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, again, I mean, I brought this forward because, to be honest, I think in our first budget season, the cost of a fire truck just blew my mind. It blew my mind. So that stood out for me when this correspondence came through. But again, I conferred with Director Williams, and I'll defer to Director Williams to speak to it from the perspective of our fire department.
Thank you again, Deputy Mayor, for bringing this forward. This is another resolution that we at Port Hope Fire and Emergency Services support. We're looking for this resolution to be sent through the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs to the provincial government. We're looking at amending standards and now require the replacement of fire apparatus at 20 years to extend that lifeline, because just as you said, the costs associated with replacing fire apparatus and the budgetary constraints that all municipalities in Ontario are facing. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And again, I do have a motion.
Please go ahead.
So the motion is that council receive the correspondence from Prince Edward County dated January 22nd, 2024 regarding support to expand the lifespan of fire apparatus, and that council endorse the resolution passed by the Council of Prince Edward County to support the province to expand the lifespan of fire apparatus, specifically pertaining to the replacement of fire trucks due to insurance requirements, and that council direct staff to circulate a copy of this resolution to David Piccini, Minister of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development, Paul Calandra, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Association of Fire Chiefs of Ontario, all Northumberland municipalities, and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario.
Thank you. Can I get a seconder, Councillor Adam? And any other discussion, any other questions, comments? Okay, then we'll take a vote. All in favor? Thank you very much. Moving on then to the next item, item 4, items for consideration. 4.1, report CS 0324, method to fill vacancy for office of Councillor Ward 2. And does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report? And I'm assuming that our clerk does.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Council has a decision that they need to make tonight, and that is through which method should you fill the council vacancy for the Ward 2 council member. The report outlines the different methods that you have available to you, considerations for the options that are available under the Municipal Act, and the two options that are there are appointment and by-election. So what we're asking for today is for a decision on which method you wish to proceed with so that we may begin the preparations for filling the vacancy. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that. I do have a question. Would you just mind clarifying for the council and for the public the three the options that are in front of us and how those relate to the Municipal Act?
Yep, absolutely. So the Municipal Act states that once a council vacancy is declared by council, which happened last week at the council meeting, there are two options that are available to council. One is to fill the vacancy via appointment, and the second is to fill the vacancy via calling a by-election. Now, we have done, now the Municipal Act in general does not state by which method you can do an appointment. So what we did is we did a review of what other municipalities have done who have been in this situation, and many of them have. And we looked at best practices, and as a result of that, we provided you with 3 sub-options for the appointment process. So the first of that is to appoint one of the runner-ups in that race. The second option is to just do a direct appointment as long as they are an eligible elector. And I should also note for the first option that the person needs to be an eligible elector in the municipality. They have to be, they should not be prohibited from voting in any way, and they have to agree to the appointment. So in the second one, you can appoint whomever you want as long as they fulfill those requirements. And then the third is to do a call for applications, and you can, we can establish a process around that. There are some procedures that we've provided to you tonight with respect to what that would look like. And as part of that particular sub-option, we'd be asking for you to approve those procedures as well. And then, of course, so those are the 3 sub-options for the appointment process. And then for the by-election process, it would be fairly straightforward. You would authorize the clerk to call a by-election. And at that point, you'd be passing a bylaw for that by-election. We would be asking you to also pass a bylaw for the alternative voting method, similar to what we used in 2022. And then we would begin our preparations for the by-election. The report outlines the considerations for each of these options. It outlines timelines related to these options, as well as the budgetary considerations for council as well.
Thank you. I'll turn over to my colleagues for any other questions of the clerk regarding the report. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'm asking this question, and forgive me, I know I've asked you this question in private already, but I think this is one that should be made that the public, I think, should hear the answer to. So what we decide regarding filling this vacant seat, this is a case-by-case basis. So should we find ourselves in a situation of somebody else resigning, it does not mean that we are required to fill that seat using the same method, right? The decision here is only for this vacant seat at this time, and anything else would be subject to a completely new decision-making process.
That is absolutely correct.
I have a few other questions, just in terms of just clarifying some of the information that we've received. One is regarding by-election. When you looked at other municipalities that were faced with making similar kinds of choices and decisions regarding an empty seat, what is typically the, we know what the voter turnout is generally in local government elections, and we know what our numbers were from our last election. But where do the numbers come in for a by-election?
So by-election numbers are historically lower, and that is just based on research that has been done over many years in the province of Ontario, and anecdotally as well. I don't have the exact figures of how much lower they are on average, but we have found that they are historically lower than a regular election.
Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So through the chair, if council chooses to do appointment and any of those options doesn't follow through, so the person does not commit to it. So my first question is what happens then? We're on a timeline, so we need to make a decision tonight, and we don't have. There's been discussion out there, but there's been no commitment from anybody officially that they would accept that seat. So the second question is the decision tonight. Could it be a two-part that if we chose appointment that it's this or that, if that's the case, that person does decline the option?
Yep, council can provide that direction to me. Absolutely, I'd be looking for some clarity on what that looks like, but absolutely, you have the ability to provide that direction. In terms of your first question about what would happen, one of the reasons that we brought this report to Committee of the Whole was to give ourselves the 2 weeks between now and council where this decision would be ratified to, if an appointment process was selected, for example, to actually reach out to the person who was selected and then confirm that they are eligible, of course, to hold office and that they are willing to hold office. If in the 2 weeks before the March 5th council meeting, they advise that they're not willing, then I would likely be coming back to council at that point, unless, of course, I get alternative direction from you tonight.
And I'm just going to throw in another question. Out of the comparable municipalities, and I certainly know that looking at the entire province of Ontario, we see that many municipalities have faced similar issues. And I know one even lost 2 councillors in the first number of months after the 2022 election. So we're not alone in having to make this kind of decision. But when you looked at the comparables to us, how many municipalities chose the appointment process versus the by-election process? And in the appointment process, how many chose to go with an application process versus going down the list of candidates? I'm just wondering if we have that information.
Yep, I think that you've asked a 2-part question. So the first question that you asked was just regarding comparables and whether they have gone, filled a vacancy via appointment or by-election. So page 9 of the report does provide some comparables for your review, and we really looked at Northumberland County and our neighbors in Durham, and we looked at the last 10 years of any vacancies that had taken place and how they had been filled. So a majority of them had been filled by appointment. I would say maybe I'm just counting here 1, 2, 3. About 8 of them out of all had been by appointment, and then there had been 4 by by-election. But for that second question that you asked, which was related to whether the appointment was next in line, or versus like a call for applications. We did reach out to the municipalities to ask that question. We did not receive an answer from one of the municipalities. However, for the others, what we discovered is that from the comparables that are noted in the report, there were six instances of appointment for the next person in line and 3 instances for a call for applications.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. Any other? Yes, Councillor Mink.
So through the chair, 2 very different questions. One is just a follow up to that, and maybe you can't answer this because now I'm getting very specific, but the difference between a by-election and a appointment, did you notice the time frame of when that takes place? I've heard some narrative out there that halfway through the period is kind of a determination of what process should or typically does get followed. So that's the first question. I'll let you answer that one first.
So thank you for that question. So I unfortunately don't have that information because it is such a case by case basis that happens. In the report that was the comparables that were provided to you, we provided some information about some that were by election. There were a few that happened, mid term, some that happened closer to the end of the term. Mostly we did see that when there is end of term, there tends to be the appointment process, but that is of course anecdotal information. I think that Director Gilmer can provide some more context on this as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to pass along that to Shrishma's point, any municipality has an option to conduct a by-election up until 90 days prior to the next election. So the list that the clerk spoke to with respect to Durham and Clarington, there are a couple examples there where the appointments took place in an election year. So the by-election was not optional.
Rick, did you have a follow-up? Yes.
And then a second question. I've had some questions regarding the cost of a by-election, and there's an appetite, I would say, for returning to the paper ballot traditional method. Could you speak a little bit about the costs in general as well as the comparison of the two options?
So the simple answer is that a cost of the paper election would be significantly higher than an internet voting election. So in 2018, not 2018, but in 2022, when we had our municipal election, the total cost of that election, not including staff overtime or staff costs, was about $55,000. And that was for internet and telephone voting. We have done this method of voting for, I would say, the last 4 elections, because it was from 2014, last 3 elections, yeah. And typically what happens is that if there is a by-election that is held between terms, the method of voting that is chosen is usually the one that was in the preceding election. In this case, this is the same method of voting that has been for the last few elections that we have. One of the things that I recommended in the report was that we choose the same method of voting again. In the 2022 election, we created processes, we created, training, etc., procedures that were in line with the alternative voting method that we chose, internet and telephone voting. We have vendors that we had worked with, our trusted vendors. So it would be very easy and easy to, access those established relationships as part of that as well, especially given the fact that this by-election, the Municipal Elections Act says that a by-election, as much as possible, needs to be conducted like a real election, like a regular election, but you have extremely compressed timelines in order to do so. So if we were to move forward and change the method of voting, that would very negatively impact our timelines, because we have absolutely no, first of all, we'd have to find a vendor who'd be willing to do it in that timeline. And I would imagine, because it's such a short turnaround, it would likely be extremely high, the charge that they would be doing. We'd have to create new processes. We'd have to create new procedures. And it would be a very resource, very resource heavy in that situation.
Councillor Less.
Are we ready for opinions yet?
You have, just
Go ahead.
before we do that, I just wanted to ask one further question that actually just adds to what Councillor Mink was asking regarding costs. We've talked about the estimates around the financial outlay, and you've said very clearly that we haven't budgeted that for that. But you also mentioned staff overtime. Can you elaborate on what that would look like in a little bit more detail?
It's hard for me to say what that would look like right now, just because, this would be likely the first time in this municipality that we're doing a by-election in the last few years, last 8 years at least. But that being said, typically in a municipal election, staff overtime is significant in the last 2 months of that election, just because of the extra customer service that people need to offer, the due diligence that we need to do for accuracy testing, auditing, etc. In this case, those costs would likely be a little bit higher just because of the fact that we have those compressed timelines. In a municipal election, we're planning that election for about 16 months before the election actually takes place. In this case, we've got 3 months.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, I'm going to just, before we go around the horseshoe, and I ask each member to share their perspective on the matter that is in front of us, I do want to share with the public, for clarity and as a matter of fact, the position held by each member of this council. And this is something that I am 100% sure of in my conversations with each of you individually, that the Ward 2 empty council seat needs to be filled by a Ward 2 constituent. This position, for the public record, is unanimous and unequivocal. So before we move on to hear from each of the council members, I do want to state that very clearly and as a matter of fact from this council table. So I want to now pass it along to each member to share their thoughts and their opinions of this important decision in front of us. And because we've always started at this end and moved this way, I'm going to reverse the order and start with Councillor Adam.
Wonderful, thank you. It's so nice to actually have the opportunity to speak first instead of the very end when everything's already talked about. So I've spoken to a lot of Ward 2 residents over the last little while. I'm a believer that a by-election is where I sit. I think it is the most democratic way of doing it and allowing the Ward 2 residents to pick the person that is representing them instead of us appointing the person that we think should represent them. When I speak with a lot of the Ward 2 residents, they seem to agree, and I'm happy about that. I realize that there are some costs and some staff hours that are needed, and that's unfortunate. I know that also we do have Chris Collins' paycheck available for that period of time too, that potentially could offset some of those costs. So that's my position on it. Is I believe a by-election is the most democratic way of allowing the residents to make their own decision.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So normally I just ramble on, but I actually wrote something down. I'll try to stick to the script. I just want to make sure to communicate myself as I intend. So first, I'd like to take a minute to thank staff and especially our clerk for redirecting your work. This was unexpected, so it was a shift. I know you're very, very resilient, and this is what you do, is you pivot on a regular basis, but I would like to thank you for that time that you spent. So there is no perfect and easy answer to this matter. My thoughts have changed direction continuously, and I think many people here, including many people in the public, that is the case. I acknowledge that whatever choice we make today, it will be scrutinized and criticized, and whether that's done immediately or down the road, that's what we're faced with. I've read the comments on Facebook, and I've taken phone calls and received emails. I can confirm that the opinions are divided. There's a large portion of people as well, a huge portion of people that are completely unaware that we have a seat vacancy. I'm still talking to them every day, and this is news to them. And I just want to make a point that Facebook is not a source of information for my decision making. And I know it seems that way to the people who are involved in that, but that's not what I use for my resources. But there was one comment on Facebook that really resonated with me, and that was a comment that council is elected to govern. So as I flip back and forth, that reminds me of why I'm here and what I'm supposed to do. We're here to govern, follow process, and protect democracy. So we have two options, a by-election or appointment. Of these options, the by-election is the most democratic. Any appointment opens the door to be scrutinized and criticized. When we're here every day, we make decisions. We get a presentation, we have discussion, and then we vote, and the vote is final. That's how we do things. Once the vote is taken, we don't go back and consider the next best option. We would revisit the process again. We present, we discuss, we vote. There was a fair election that took place. 2 people were elected and as front runners, and there were 2 that were third and fourth. And there's a reason the 2 people were voted and elected in, and there was a reason why the other ones were not democratically chosen. That was the process, and that was the voice of the people. If we start deviating from the democratic process, we open ourselves up to criticism and mistrust. I said earlier, that there's a consequence to the decisions that we make. There was a consequence to us raising taxes substantially in 2 years. And now I'm hearing a desire to not spend more money. But I question why it would be at the cost of denying Ward 2 their democratic right and privilege for a by-election. I think this council is trying to make everyone happy, but we are here to govern and make those tough choices. So after much discussion and thought, I've concluded that a by-election is the only choice. If I'm going to stand up for rural representation, protect democratic process, and believe in the reason I'm here at all, I believe that the by-election is the only choice for me. And the last point is when we come to the point, I'm asking for a recorded vote.
Thank you, Councillor Mink. Councillor Clare and Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So for me, throughout the last number of weeks and as we move forward for the next couple of weeks, the central consideration needs to be that we arrive on a process and an outcome that's considered legitimate by the residents of Ward 2. And so that's the lens that I'll be using throughout this deliberation. I appreciate the thinking behind both Councillor Adam and Councillor Mink's positions regarding a by-election, and I believe you're coming from a genuine desire to ensure that democracy is upheld. That said, I have been struck by what I have seen as a consistent message received from residents of Ward 2 and neighbors in Ward 2, whether through the unfortunately limited correspondence that has been shared with council through official channels, through my own personal consultations these past many weeks, both by phone and in person, including just this morning in conversation with a number of neighbors at the Garden Hill Farmers Market, as well as in following the many threads of conversation between neighbors online, which I think I'm on record many times as saying I do see as being a legitimate source of consultation and listening to what people have to say. And to what I have seen is that the overwhelming majority seem to favor the appointment of the runner-up candidate. It makes me uncomfortable, for sure, that this is in contrast to what you have said that you are hearing, and it disappoints me that our councillor from Ward 2 may be receiving different messages than the rest of the members of this council, because this is not a decision that is made by one council member alone, nor is she the only member of this council whose job it is to represent the rural community. Once we take the seat at this table, we are all responsible for representing the interests of the entire community. And so I'm saddened, and I think that is, again, something that we need to keep in our mind as something we need to address and work on, because we all need to be hearing from the same constituents that you're hearing from. Notably, we have received a couple of pieces of correspondence from those favoring a by-election. But the challenge I have is that the arguments that they're using for why we should proceed with a by-election are in many cases hypotheticals or things that don't necessarily apply in this case. So the question about what would happen if the runner-up was not willing to serve, in this case, in fact, the runner-up is on record saying they are willing to serve. We received an email from him to that effect weeks ago, and that has also been shared publicly by that candidate. The other rationale being offered is that we would be setting a precedent that would not work or be palatable in other cases. Again, I asked that question of the clerk again this evening and have been assured that we would not be beholden to any precedents should this conundrum present itself again, and that any such decision would be on a case-by-case basis. So again, there is no risk in simply going with option 1A and appointing the next runner-up on that basis. The final argument I've heard is regarding the number of votes garnered by the runner-up being 374. And some are pointing out that with a total of 1,323 voters casting ballots, the majority did not vote for him. I hear that, but nor did the majority vote for any of us who currently occupy seats at this table. I don't actually think we need to get too much in the weeds around these numbers, but to me, 374 is just shy of 30%, which strikes me as a reasonable showing, given that it would still just be one vote at this table, not among the others. But if we do want to debate how much support is required to legitimately gain a seat at this table, I think it may actually be an argument against a by-election. So we know, as outlined in the clerk's report, that by-elections have lower voter turnout than regular elections. I could not, in my own research, find any statistics specific to Ontario municipalities, but I did find an extensive research paper that looked at historical data from across Canada that showed that by-election turnout is typically 20 percentage points lower. And we only had 38% voter turnout in Ward 2 in the general election. And even if it wasn't actually only 18%, we'd still be looking at a lot less than 1,000 votes. And so assuming there would be multiple names on that ballot, the odds of anyone getting more than 374 votes are almost none. So we would essentially be going through an involved process just to have someone sitting here who actually garners less support than the runner-up did in 2022. And I'm not sure if that's what Ward 2 would be looking for from us. Again, I realize I'm taking a position here that differs from Councillor Minks, and that does give me pause. I'm certainly not closed to looking at the other options, but I do think that a commitment to democratic representation also requires us to listen to our constituents and to try to represent their interests when we're at this table. I have been actively trying to reach and speak to as many residents of Ward 2 as I could these past weeks. And it is my belief that rural residents are actually telling us they want us to appoint the next runner-up. And so if we're going to consider anything other than that option, I need some more convincing, and I think I need to hear some better and more compelling reasons for us to do so.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Less.
Well, I was going to say ditto because by the time it got to me, I would have nothing new to add. But I guess I still have a little bit to think about. I kind of think we can't be too narrow in saying it's got to be this or this. I think we got some room to maneuver here. I think that what I'd like to see is that the onus be on the residents of the rural area to make the decision. First of all, it's their councillor, their decision. Secondly, as the mayor has stated, that it will be a rural representative that would be filling the seat. My first leaning, the most democratic, of course, is a by-election, but it's the most expensive and it's the most timely. The least acceptable is for council to arbitrarily appoint somebody. Okay, so those are the two extremes, and now we got to figure out something in the middle that will work. And I think the thing in the middle that would work is if we called for applications, so we broaden the base of potential candidates, and we do it in public so that anybody in the rural area can voice their opinion and sit in on all the discussions. There'll be no in camera, and say, okay, so we have representation from the electorate to help us make the decision. And I think that's a fair way of doing it. The numbers, you're right, the numbers will be skewed all over the place. We'll probably get minimal representation from the electorate. I'll be surprised if we have 50 people that'll be sitting in this room while we have our discussions with the applicants. But that's the way it goes. And you know, I'm not that I'm ever fed up, but you know, I'm going to get blamed 50% of the time for whatever decision I make. So I'm voicing this as putting this forward as my opinion, and that's the way I can live with things. Thank you.
And thank you very much. Councillor Todd.
My turn. It's a difficult choice for sure. And one of the things that we recognize is whichever method we choose, for some people it'll be the right method, and for other people it's going to be the wrong method. So we start from that position. When I was going through the options, where I started from was, we need to start with democracy, right? We are here to choose a process. We're not here to choose a person, right? The people choose the people. We choose the process. For me, the most democratic options that we had on the table are options 2, which is the by-election, and the other one is option 1A, which is we go back to the democratic voting that we had before, and whoever's next in line receives that appointment. When I was looking at the by-election, if I was being honest, the council has been very sensitive towards money. We just came out of budgets. There was a lot of deliberations about money. We recognize that money is an issue in our public, and so there's a sensitivity towards that. But I also recognize that there's a cost of democracy, and so the Ward 2 residents deserve to have that money if that's what is the most democratic way in which to move forward on it. Having said that, you go further in the report, and then there's human resources. There's a 4-month gap before we can actually put the second representative in for Ward 2. I don't think that's fair to Ward 2. I think to be underrepresented, it's already been 2 months. To go another 4 months means 6 months out of 4 years underrepresented is not fair. It also takes our clerk away from the rest of the community, which is also unfair. So I took the by-election off the table and went, well, we already had an election. There was some interest in the other candidates. I think we should just follow through with that and move on to the next candidate. So I would go with 1A.
Thank you very much to all of my colleagues for very thoughtful comments. And I do know from conversations with each and every one of you that this is something that has occupied your time and your reflections and your decisions. And maybe what I want to say is I don't necessarily want to repeat some of the fine points that have already been made around the table, but just to, again, ground ourselves in the fact that the options that are available to us are all considered to be democratic because they are listed in the Municipal Act. The Municipal Act is what governs us, and we are created by the Act, and we are given powers and duties for providing good government and good governance. So we did not create these options, and those options are there because they're considered to be equally viable for any municipality to choose from. And certainly if we want to get into the thick of democratic theory, I can put on my political science hat and talk about, what are more or less democratic ways to move forward. But having said all of that, I have heard from quite a few constituents their concerns about spending money on an unnecessary by-election. And look, I really believe in principled decision-making. And as Councillor Todd just mentioned, we came out of some pretty challenging and difficult budget discussions in which we really did pick the meat off the bones to get down to a bare bones tax increase. And I was on the record to bring forward a motion to reduce that by 0.5%. So as a principal decision maker, I cannot in good conscience ask this municipality to absorb the cost of a by-election, knowing, as Councillor Clare pointed out, that there are costs of a by-election, and that those costs, can they be necessarily warranted when we know that statistically the turnout for a by-election is far lower than for a regular election? And also, who are going to be the people that are able to pivot in short period of time to put their names forward to campaign and to have the resources to do that? It's, to me, it may not be the best representation of interest that exists in Ward 2. So those two things combined, along with the kind of numbers that Councillor Clare had put out on the table, lead me to absolutely reject the by-election for this municipality. And we do have a strategic plan with many priorities that need to be implemented that require our clerk and the staff of corporate services that would be involved to be fully present to move forward. And some of those initiatives are going to bring about important changes and cost savings for this municipality. And I also agree with Councillor Todd when he says that gap in time of how long there isn't good representation of Ward 2 is something to cause all of us pause. It means that things are already imbalanced and they can continue to be so. So for all those reasons, a by-election is absolutely off the table for me. I had initially started with the position of just going to the third place finisher and saying that that was a reflection of the will of Ward 2 based on the election that had happened in 2022. I changed my opinion in conversation with colleagues around the table when we had talked about the different options and what might be a middle ground, or perhaps arguably a bit of a compromise. And to my mind, an application process might just strike that chord. And as all of my colleagues have pointed out, nothing that we put forward is going to be an ideal solution. It's going to be open to criticism. But my thought about the application process is this. Concerns that I have heard from folks about the third place finisher, for all the reasons that they have, would not negate that person from coming forward in an application process and being heard in public by this table and by the public. Secondly, an application process could be very much informed by Ward 2 residents sending in questions that could help us shape the interview process or the content of presentations. We could also have a process where there would be a period of time between presentations and the time that this council would deliberate all in public. This entire process would be in public, and we could take the time to ask for fulsome engagement by the public in this decision-making process. And as I had stated in my opening comments this evening, there is unanimous consent at this table that Ward 2 should be represented by Ward 2. So I think that is a really important principle that we all agree on which there is consensus. So from my perspective, taking everything into account, reflecting what I've heard in conversations, correspondence, phone calls, and also reflecting the conversations, the very thoughtful conversations I've been having with council members, and also with our clerk, answering some of the questions that I had. My position is in favor for an application process that would lead to an appointment. Deputy Mayor.
So it seems to me that there's a majority view at the table about appointment as opposed to by-election. I mean, obviously, that's not official until we vote, but if given that, I would be very interested to hear from my colleagues to the left who favor a by-election, if that, when it comes to appointment, do you have a perspective, or would you lean one way or another in terms of a process for appointment?
So through the chair, no, my decision is based on by-election. I put a lot of thought into that. I think $25,000 is a lot of money, but on a multi-million-dollar budget, $25,000 gives the residents of Ward 2 the right to a by-election, to vote again. And I think that is value. I think that's their voice. Appointment, the appointment, I did have a discussion with a few members of council about the appointment by application. But the risk with that is that we're bringing people up here to present. And when you say you want a Ward 2 person there in that seat, when people come forward and present and answer questions, if we make criteria, we could have some excellent Ward 1 candidates come up that fit all the criteria, is the model counselor. And then you're obligated, because you're stating right now is going to be a Ward 2 person. If you have one Ward 2 person that shows up and is not ideal, you're bound to placing that person in that chair. And then that is what will follow throughout the rest of the term. So I find that a very, very risky alternative the more that I thought about it.
Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I don't think I can get behind the application process. I don't want to turn this into a job application. I think we do need to put it through to vote. If it came down to choosing that method or by-election, I would change my mind to by-election. I don't think that's the right way to go.
Councillor Lass.
Well, I hear a lot of talk about how fiscally responsible we're trying to be, and we're frivolously going to spend $25,000 to potentially get the same result. Okay, so aren't we going to look kind of funny if that happens? And at least by opening up the application process, we have the electorate has choice. And the what if game that Councillor Mink you're playing with the thought that a better candidate will come out of Ward 1 than Ward 2, that's the luck of the draw. And you know what? If nobody steps forward from Ward 2, or only one person steps forward for 1, 2, that's the way the system works.
Thank you. And I think I just want to add one thing around just some of this discussion here as well, is that I'm not sure that we have any guarantees one way or another that we will get more candidates through a by-election process than we necessarily would through an appointment process by application. In fact, arguably, we also know from data and from research that entrance into politics is very prohibitive for many people due to socioeconomic reasons, based on gender, based on a lot of other barriers that exist in the political process, which make it arguably not as democratic as we would like it to be. And under shorter timelines, those kinds of barriers actually become even more amplified. So I'm not certain that we would necessarily get a better slate of candidates in a by-election than we would in a process asking for applications with measures in place to engage the community at every step of the way and do all of our deliberations in public. Councillor Mink.
So I just want to respond to Councillor Andrews' comment. So I have spent 2 elections knocking on hundreds of doors. The common theme I hear at almost every door is our taxes are too high and we don't get anything for it. I'm not going to expand on that, but it's just now we've just passed 2 elections two budgets and raised taxes substantially. And when I'm hearing the voice of the rural people saying, I don't get anything from my taxes, we're sharpening our pencils, and the first thing we're cutting is their right to vote. The one of the very few things that they have, that they feel they have, and now we're saying, this is where we're going to cut. I could go through that budget and find all sorts of things that we could be cutting. Yes, we may not have as many festivals and parties and stuff like that, but I'm representing my rural community and I hear them say our taxes are too high and we don't get anything. So the one thing I can give them is the right to vote. And that's why I'm making this choice.
Thank you, Councillor Mink. Just one thing that I actually did want to ask you then, if we take that thinking to its logical conclusion, then why wouldn't you just be behind an appointment of the third place finisher through a democratic process that finished in 2022?
Thank you. So I heard from a split community. I heard from crunching numbers. I didn't want to get too far into the numbers. I know Councillor Clare spoke about the numbers. There was 2 people who received, one being myself, 646 votes and 604 votes. They were clearly the front runners. The next 2 down were 374 and 340. So those 2 are further down. There's a very difference in the separation of those votes. There was another, I think, 218 people who didn't cast their second vote. So I'm hearing from those residents who are saying, I didn't vote for the runners up. I'm losing my vote. I came out, I voted for one of the top 2, or I voted only for one of the top 2 and didn't cast that vote. So they're essentially losing their vote. That's what I'm hearing from them. So that's why I can't take that stance at this time.
Deputy Mayor, and then Councillor Adam.
So, I have this concern because, I honestly, I don't think I could have done anything else to connect with any more residents in Ward 2 than I did. I think I even posted something like a plea. I used the word a plea. Please contact your council and let us know what you think about this. And one of the things that I heard back after posting that on Facebook, for full disclosure, was I think people know that we'll tell you what we want and you'll do whatever you want anyway. And I crafted probably 4 or 5 different responses to that resident, which I didn't post because I couldn't figure out how to respond to that effectively. But my concern is if for those of us who are not you, who don't have the benefit of hearing from these other residents, do we take your word for it? We don't know who they are, how many they represent. Does that outweigh what we're hearing in other places? And so for me, for my conscience to represent people, I have to go with what I am hearing and observing and in all the different places that I've been listening in. And it's overwhelming, the majority in those spaces, in those conversations, that say they don't want a by-election. They want us to keep it simple and appoint the runner-up. So for me, I'm not anti-by-election because of the cost. I think if rural residents overwhelmingly were saying, we want a by-election, I'd be all for it. And I wouldn't flinch at spending the money to make that happen. But that's not what I'm hearing. And there's a disconnect there. And so, I'm not distrusting that you're hearing what you're hearing, but what do the rest of us do with that? And maybe my question to Ward 2, those of you who are here, to ask your neighbors, like, how do we represent you if we don't hear from you? And I honestly, I don't know the answer to that. But what concerns me about that is that how are we going to get more than the 20 people who are here this evening to show up and be part of any process, whether it's a by-election, whether it's a process of appointment by application, right? And I just don't see right now with any confidence an option that leads to us hearing from more than 374 people. We've heard from 374 people already in favor of that candidate. And if we don't have a process in place that's going to help us hear from more than that, then how do we not go with that higher number of residents who have already voiced their interest?
Yes, Councillor Adam.
Thank you. So through the chair, I just want to go back to a question that the deputy mayor asked, and if it wasn't the by-election, which one would I prefer between either the appointment or through the application process? And I don't really want to comment on that until I know that the by-election is off the table. So I'm actually going to put forth a motion right now to accept option 2, the by-election, and see where we're at.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I will ask for a seconder on that. Councillor Mink, any further discussion? Okay, so we'll take a vote.
Sorry. So Madam Chair, Councillor Mink has requested a recorded vote. So I'm just going to read out the motion right now, and then after that, we'll call for that vote. So the motion as it stands is that report CS 0324 be received, and that council directs staff to proceed with option 2, being the by-election, in order to fill the vacancy for office of councillor, Ward 2, moved by Councillor Pearson and seconded by Councillor Mink. So now it's time for the recorded vote in accordance with our procedure bylaw. We will start with the name of the councillor alphabetically, my last name. So you have to vote yes or no. So we will start with Councillor Andrews.
No.
Councillor Attridge.
No.
Deputy Mayor Holloway Wadhwani.
No.
Councillor Mink.
Yes.
Councillor Pearson.
Yes.
Mayor Hankivsky.
No.
So total yes votes are 2 and total no votes are 4, and so the motion is defeated.
Thank you. I think, yes, I know, Councillor Adam, that you want to come back into the conversation, but I'm going to suggest that we take a brief 10-minute recess and come back to the table. Okay, I think we're ready to reconvene. Just before we were going to break, Councillor Adam had his hand up, so I'll revert back to you, and you can start us off.
Absolutely, thank you. So I just wanted to finish off with the question that that the deputy mayor had asked. Now that I've been defeated on the by-election, I personally believe that the third place candidate should be appointed. That would be my next position. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else want to continue the post vote conversation? Did you want to, Councillor Mink?
No, I don't want to add to that. I just want to ask, my request for a recorded vote, is that through every motion you bring forward?
No, we can certainly do a recorded vote for the next one as well, and note that you would want for all of them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Less.
I had a chance to sit on the board at McDonald's, and we had a president who was extremely funny, and his thoughts when we were in voting was be a vote till you get it right. So that's what we'll do.
Is there anything else that anybody else would like to add around the table? Okay, I think, Deputy Mayor, and then I'm going to make just a final comment as well.
Yeah, I think I just want to refer back to my opening remarks, which was really that I think, the most important thing that we need to be looking at here is which is the process that is most likely to be deemed legitimate by the residents of Ward 2. And so, I am intrigued by the appointment by application idea. I think, is there potential of getting people to the table who might not otherwise be there, who could be very strong and all of that? Sure, I can see that there's some enticement there, but I'm not sure I see how that process is received as legitimate by Ward 2. And how do we communicate, of the options, it's the most complicated, right? It took up a lot of real estate in the report. It's not straightforward. So how would we communicate that? How would we engage with the public effectively around that, so that there was buy-in to that process? And if anybody has confidence in in a strategy for doing that, I'd be all ears.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Those are, really good concerns and great questions. And I think I would like to actually ask the clerk for elaboration on whether or not, or
Yeah.
our Director
Yes.
of Corporate Services to comment on what might be the elements and mechanisms by which we could communicate, put in place processes that would allow Ward 2 residents to feel a part of the process, to be heard, and to even shape the process.
I think, thanks for the question. I think with respect to sort of reaching the audience, I have every confidence we can put together a plan that does exactly that to the best of our abilities. First and foremost, though, council here tonight sort of needs to provide that direction. I don't want to speak to sort of the processes we would use for each of the options prior to council making an option. Council's consideration of this topic is sort of firmly within your hands. We are happy to speak to communications plans and strategies following that direction.
Thank you for that kind of vague answer. But let me then be more pointed and ask, would there be an opportunity for the public to send in questions that would inform this kind of process? Would there be an opportunity for the public to ask about the content of presentations that would be put forward by any qualified candidate? Would there be an opportunity for the public to be present at any presentation of applicants? Would there be an opportunity for the public to give feedback on the process after a presentation is made to the clerk and to the council? And would there be an opportunity for all of this to happen in public with full transparency?
I will do my best to answer that question, Madam Mayor. And if I am not able to answer all of those sub-questions, then please let me know. But the one thing I just want to highlight is that the Municipal Act very clearly gives council the authority to choose a by-election and an appointment. The Municipal Act does not lay out how that appointment process takes place, so it is within council's purview to develop that appointment process. Now, as part of the 1B, which is the call for applications process, one of the things that we've provided you is a set of procedures. These procedures were developed after a very rigorous review of best practices, as well as a review of the legislation to ensure that it was a completely public process and that it was transparent to the public. So in terms of opportunities for community engagement with respect to this, there are a few, and you have highlighted those as well. So obviously there is one tonight where there is question period following this meeting. People have the option to ask questions and gain clarification. All of the application, and this is something that we have included in the procedures, but that all of the applications as they are received will be posted online for public review, and residents will be encouraged to contact council for feedback. And as well, residents will be encouraged to submit questions to the clerk's office or to council members, and then we will look for mechanisms to also post those questions publicly. Residents have the opportunity to attend the presentations as well, so that they can view them and they can understand what the platforms are for all of the applicants. But ultimately, this is a council decision. And so what I would encourage is for that community feedback to take place via council, so that council can make that decision when it is time to make it.
So just thank you for that. Just a follow-up on that last point. Would there be an opportunity for us as council to receive feedback from the community between the time that a final presentation was made by potential qualified applicants and the time in which we would deliberate and make the decision in public?
So we can take that feedback back and we can revise some of the procedures to give that time. Currently, the procedures do state that you have the option to have a recess and you can adjourn for a day and then reconvene on the next day. But the language is vague currently in the procedures, and we can elongate that time. That being said, we are on a very, very strict time clock for the appointment process. You declare the seat vacant on February 13th. If you are going to be appointing, we have to appoint that person by April 13th. And that is the final date that we can appoint that person. So in order to give enough time for people to submit their applications, for the public to review those applications, and then for you to then have the presentations take place, between the presentations and the decision making, there would be time, but it would not be a very long time. So I would encourage the residents to be very proactively offering that feedback to council.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Less. Oh. Okay. So we need a seconder for that motion. I'm going to second that motion.
The mayor, you cannot second the
Oh.
motion.
Great. Can I turn it over to?
Yes, you
Deputy?
can.
Okay.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Mayor Alana. Any further discussion? Councillor Mink?
Thank you. So I just want to take this opportunity to make it very clear that my decision is process over people. I've sat up here with 11 people, and whoever is selected, if somebody is going to sit there, and that person I will work with. So the third place candidate in the election, not personal. If that person is here, that great. This option that we have on the table right now, I've heard, I just want to put that in perspective, that we have 5 Ward 1 people selecting who is going to sit in that chair. And I've just heard from the deputy mayor that the voice of Ward 2, you did not hear that. So I just want everybody to think about that. I do not want to be in a position where it's Councillor Mink, what do you think? I am not going to make that decision on who sits on that chair for the entire community. This is something that you will need to be engaged with the rural community to get that answer, because it doesn't lie on me.
Any further questions? Mayor Alana?
No, and I absolutely appreciate, Councillor Mink, your comments on this. And again, in taking this position as chair, as previous chair before Deputy Mayor took over as chair, my intent was trying to find a bridge between a number of the different perspectives that I heard around the table. So as I had publicly stated, my first position was simply to go to appoint the third place finisher. And I was trying to hear some of the voices and concerns that I had heard from my fellow councillor members, and that is why I landed on this position. And that is why I'm supporting Councillor Less's motion on this.
Thank you. Any other questions or points of discussion before we vote? Seeing none, then we'll call the vote.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So Councillor Mink has requested a recorded vote. So I want to read the motion out before we vote on the matter. So the motion that, as it stands, moved by Councillor Andrews and seconded by Mayor Hankivsky, that report CS 0324 be received, and that council direct staff to proceed with option 1B, being appointment by call for applications in order to fill the vacancy for office of councillor Ward 2. So we will start in accordance with our procedure bylaw on the recorded vote, last name by alphabetical order. So the first person to vote would be Councillor Andrews.
Yes.
Councillor
No.
Deputy Mayor Wadhwani, Halawi Wadhwani.
No.
Councillor Mink.
No.
Councillor Pearson.
No.
Mayor Hankivsky.
Yes.
So we have total yes votes 2 and total no votes 4. The motion is defeated.
So just moving forward, I'm taking back the chair, but I'm going to now put the chair back, ask the deputy mayor to take the chair back, and I'm going to put a motion on the table that we appoint the third place finisher as per the option that is laid out to us in the staff report. And as I'd mentioned, that was the original position that I had started with. My intent moving in a different direction was really to try to hear the voices and concerns of my fellow colleagues. But I will go back to that original position and put forward a motion in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Alana. So we have a motion on the floor for option 1A. Is there a seconder? Councillor Todd. Any further discussion? Councillor Adam?
So this motion being on the floor now, let's say the third place person does not take it. Are we then extending it to the fourth place, fifth place, sixth place, whatever else is on there? Is that what we're putting on there?
I think that the question I asked the clerk to that point earlier is that no, that if that were to happen, we would reopen the discussion. And yeah. Any other questions or discussion before we vote?
So the one thing that I do want to highlight is that option 1A is appointment from the 2022 municipal election candidates. The report does not outline that you would wish to appoint the third place finisher. So that would need to be added to this motion to give staff direction that we have to approach the third place finisher and determine qualifications and interest before March 5th.
Okay, so I believe the mayor in her wording of the motion did say the third place finisher. I
mistake, sorry.
paraphrased as
Okay.
1A, so that was my bad.
Okay.
Perhaps could you read out the wording of the motion before we
Yes.
vote?
Yes, one moment, please. Okay, so, and this is a recorded vote that has been requested by Councillor Mink. So it would be, the motion in its entirety would read that report CS 0324 be received, that council direct staff to proceed with option 1A, which is the appointment from the 2022 municipal election candidates in order to fill the vacancy for office of councillor Ward 2, and that council direct staff to approach the third place finisher in the 2022 Ward 2 municipal election to determine interest and qualifications before March 5th. So we will now move forward with the recorded vote, and I've already explained the procedure, so I'm not going to do that again. So this is with respect to the motion that I just stated. We will start with Councillor Andrews.
No.
Councillor,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Halawi Wadhwani,
Yes.
Councillor Mink,
No.
Councillor Pearson,
Yes.
and Mayor Hankivsky.
Yes.
So we have a total yes votes 4 and a total no votes 2. The motion is carried.
Deputy Mayor.
I would like to just to say in terms of process, because I know we're still working through our new procedural bylaw and how this all works. So just a reminder that this is committee. So the final decision, as you said, is March 5th. So a plea, Ward 2, if you think we've got it wrong, contact us, be in communication with council, because we will be deliberating about this again on March 5th prior to a final vote.
Thank you for that. Moving on to report number 4.2, FS0324, re 2023 council expenditures. Does staff have anything further they would like to add before we consider this report? Okay, do any council members have questions or comments relating to this pretty straightforward report? Okay, seeing none, the recommended action is listed on the agenda. Can I ask for a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Todd, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? Thank you very much. Moving on to 4.3, presentation re 2025 budget roadmap. Introduction. We will now have a presentation from staff introducing the 2025 budget roadmap. Can I ask the director to introduce this exciting presentation?
Thank you very much. So a wee bit early in some ways in February, but here we are talking about the 2025 budget. But really just to lay out the process that we're looking and make some connections based on the dialogue that we had in November and December. So could I use to it? Oh. This is an improvement over our prior budgets, but really building on just building on this success, but laying out a bit more of a roadmap to make connections between some of the annual reports that we provide, but then also the impact on the budget. So the hope is that later tonight or in March, you know, when we're up talking about a certain topic, that it isn't seen as just like a receipt for information. Sure, we're aware, and then 6 months later, when it comes time to the budget, you know, it may not be quite as top of mind. So we're trying to make those connections, and also as we talk about the reports, we're going to make an effort to remind on the impact of the budget. Okay. The hope then is that you've got a much longer period of time where you're thinking about these things in the build up to when we get to the budget. And some of them will be things to consider, and some of these will be decision points that will lead in and help inform. So take me to the back to the. I just need to go back to the previous slide. So there were some key discussion points that came up during the 2024 budget deliberations. You know, we said, hey, like this is the bigger topic than just for today, you know, when we're in the middle of the budget. And so looking to carve out a time, right, and actually plan for that discussion to take place during the year. As I mentioned, considerations to discuss and some decision-making opportunities that will help lead up. And so when we get to the budget, we'll have made some decisions, you know, before we get to the actual budget. We will provide professional development opportunities to expand the knowledge of this group on budget-related topics, and look to further establish a holistic understanding of the interconnected considerations contributing to the overall municipal budget. And we talk about the infrastructure funding gap. You know, it's both how much money is coming from levy and how much money is coming from grants, and our asset management plan and levels of service within the asset management plan, and all of those parts. So most of these things we're going to talk about don't just happen in isolation. And so it's really about making those connections again. Next slide, please, Tanya. So it's going to be a collection, really three main categories. We're going to have recurring annual reports or updates. We're going to have some special topics and presentations, and then as well some professional development. This is a planned delivery timeline, subject to change sometimes as we have the information is available to us to be able to share with you. And also, as you'll see soon, there's a lot planned, so we're going to do our best with our resources to keep up with it. Next slide, please. So just as some samples on the recurring annual reports, we have the grant annual update. Stay tuned, it's next. And then later on, we'll have things like the property tax receivables, user fees and charges, reserve and reserve funds, things that you will recall certainly from last year. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see we also have some special topics. So this year, development charges, our 2024 study, which internally we're kicking off tomorrow. So we're right on the heels of that. So that's something that comes up. It doesn't come up every year, right? And so that's something that that we will be talking about in just a few months. Also, planning and development projections. We often talk about the impact that growth has, both obviously to the community, but also in terms of the budget, in terms of additional tax dollars and growth and other impacts that has. So we're working with the planning team to have a bit of an update of what might that look like, you know, as a more general forecast, as opposed to just kind of a item by item that comes up basis. So good awareness for all of us, as well as asset management planning as we continue going down that road on our journey, looking at levels of service and establishing those for the municipality. And then finally, some professional development. So again, really related, asset management is going to be a key theme. We're going to have several elements related to asset management. The development charges, even through legislation, it's kind of we'll have a few sessions by the time we kind of kick it off and explain it, have our public meeting and some final decisions. And then we also talked about just having the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, or MPAC, come and talk a little bit about you know, the property values that get attributed that we then turn around and use for taxation. And then also a little bit of a tax policy that we have impact on here and what's impacted, much of which is through the county. So we're going to kind of lay out and have some of those conversations. So I've given you a few samples. This right now is the overall roadmap. We've planned this out based on either our regular meeting schedule. And you can see it's fairly ambitious. There are definitely some additions over prior years, but many of the things there, as I said, you know, you've seen before. This isn't all new, but what we're really hoping to do through this process is, as we go through, some of these will kind of, you know, we'll turn them green or whatever, and so you can start to see how it's going to build. As we often, you know, it's a lot of information when you get down to budget day, right? In terms of considering, so trying to just have those building blocks so that we're building that knowledge, which we have been doing, but making the connections along the way, you know, for you and highlighting them, so that it, you know, we're better prepared when it comes to the actual final budget decision. So we're going to be talking about this again. We're going to be working through it. Today was really just to give you an initial introduction, make you aware of kind of what we are working through, and start that process. That's all I have on this topic, unless there's any questions.
Thank you very much. I think it's very exciting to see all of this information at this stage and knowing what to expect. And I, for one, look forward to MPAC folks coming. I think they'll be brave if they come, because we'll have lots of questions for them, to be sure. So really appreciate seeing this come forward to the council table. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So thank you for this. This looks great. A couple of questions. So there's discussions that reoccur annually at council. So one of those discussions is the LLRW funds and what we can do with those if there's an alternative. That's too late to have that discussion. So is on this timeline, is there a place where discussions like that take place? And that was my first question. There's also we when budget comes to as well, we get for instance, vehicles on different pages, and we don't see like a fleet strategy, or when we have staff positions, they come on different pages and we don't see an org structure. So is there somewhere along this timeline where we will have visibility into those type of discussions that come forward?
Certainly. So through the chair. So LRW, we will be talking about that. We'd also talked about the hydro reserve as well. So we've got notes of both of those. Likely along the way when we get to the reserve topic. The other part will be more, we're looking at kind of revamping how we actually do the budget presentation. Things change in time, and you've seen a version of our current one that's evolved over several years, and it was a really great step forward for us. It served a purpose at the time, and now we're kind of looking at how we can maybe shorten it down and actually group some of the aspects together, have it be a little less by department, and really just build on some of the things we heard kind of from our experience. When we go through it too, and it seems like it makes sense, and then you're actually presenting it, think, okay, maybe we could do this a different way. The input that we had from you from last year, and certainly also the input we've had from our CAO to kind of change part of that. So going and doing a lot more of an advance, what we're hoping actually to do is actually get it down, so we're most so focusing on one one day when we sit down and go through it, but we've made decisions along the way and have more awareness of the factors that are going into it. So I do appreciate you raising both of those. Those we do have on our list as you're going through. If you are thinking about other aspects, please do reach out to me. We'll do our best to cover as much as we can. We're probably not going to get everything perfect for this budget, but it's definitely going to be an improvement, and we'll just look to continue that.
Yes, a follow-up from Councillor Mink.
Sorry, and just one more question. So often after an election in the weeks following, I hear a lot of very thoughtful ideas coming from the public who's watched the proceedings and have some very good suggestions, but it's often too late at that point. So is there any opportunity here that information, some of those considerations are brought forward very concise and very user-friendly, because those budget reports are very difficult for a typical person to pull out for their nightly reading, right? So that's my question. Is there an opportunity that they can see some of these items so we can hear their thoughts before we deliberate?
Sorry, in terms of seeing some of these aspects earlier, so we do post the material in advance. We are going to be looking to shorten down the actual presentation in terms of the detail, because we recognize we've got some who just want some high-level information, and then some who do want the details. So we do end up posting both. The presentation will be a little bit more succinct, I guess I'll call it, for 2025. And originally I was thinking that you were talking about having, the community consultation open, post-budget, to be able to capture some of those ideas, which we can certainly look at. I do know that we're looking at, our kickoff is on here, as well as our initial community consultation, which will be earlier, this year as well. So there will be lots of opportunity if people did have those ideas post this year's budget to be able to share them well in advance when we're still, in the early stages of developing the budget this year. I guess if you got any more specifics, on how to.
I think maybe potentially just the way it happens is we have 2 very long days, and we've kind of, by the end of day 2, we lock it in, and then 2 weeks later, we make the final vote. And there really isn't a lot of time in that period to hear from these great ideas that the public is bringing forward. We have a lot of people who are professionals, people who will comment on fire and emergency services because they're former fire chiefs and things like that, things that some of us would never think about. And they're very thoughtful ideas, but that timeline for them to give us that feedback doesn't seem to be long enough.
Yeah, I guess the one doesn't sound like the feedback is specific on like a decision that was made, right? Or something that was kind of in the package. Well, I mean, if they are, then that's why we have the time period in between. But it sounds like some of them are more removed, just general good ideas. And that's really what we try and elicit, during the community consultation, process. And certainly if they don't have, if they don't think of them and they think of them after, we're certainly happy to receive them and capture them and take that into consideration, for another year. But we do try and provide lots of different opportunities. I recognize kind of once something is always final, there will always be some people who then start to get involved in it and read up on it, and potentially we could have some community, involvement. We could leave it open longer to capture those for another year. But I mean, either way, at that point, the decision's been made. So.
Thank you. And just a couple of comments. I really take Councillor Mink's point. I think that one of the things that I personally found most useful about the presentation that happened this year were the metrics that compared us with other municipalities, so we could see how we're faring in terms of our spending, on infrastructure, on capital, on staffing. Just, I think having those comparisons is very, very useful. I agree with Councillor Mink about that synthesis, the overview, the big picture presentation of items, so that they're not parsed necessarily by, different departments, but actually seeing all of the information as a whole at the very beginning, and then asking for more detail as the days go on to better understand how they appear in the way that they do. And finally, I am very concerned about trying to really strengthen our community consultation opportunities and engagement. I mean, how can we get the constituents of Port Hope to be really excited about being part of any kind of budget process, so that when we do have events, that we've got more than a small handful of folks coming ahead of time to have the conversations, rather than trying to play catch up after decisions are being made, and hearing that maybe my voice wasn't heard. So I would really like to see if we could try to do some different things this time around to capture the hearts and minds of Port Hopians about the importance of being part of those discussions, even before we get to the table where we're looking at some of those final proposals and numbers. Oh gosh. Button. Any other comments or questions regarding this report? Okay. The recommended action is, of course, to receive this presentation for information. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Councillor Mink. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. Moving on to report 4.4, FS 0424 2023 grant funding applied and or awarded summary. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
I'd be happy to, Chair. So overall, on our formula-based funding, I had almost $2.75 million, which is great and certainly helpful. We also submitted 20 grant applications. We were successful with 15 and are awaiting 4, so quite a high success rate on that front, resulting in just over $1 million. Certainly notable, we get more money from the formula funding, and obviously there is their own level of reporting that we do have to do with that. But the grant application, parts certainly take a good bit more effort and typically come in smaller dollars. But we do, to support that, we did last year have a part-time grant facilitator position that has been hired and has joined our team and is integrating as well. So those are good, positive. It was increases of 0.67 million over what we had in the prior year. Now that isn't always going to be the case, because obviously if we have something large like the Town Park Rec Center and we get a large amount of money, that doesn't necessarily happen every year. So it's both project-based and also just funding availability, of which there tends to be, somewhat less funding available, right now. And so this is kind of starts my tie into the overall, budget process. So we had about $3.75 million in total in 2023. It does end up being inconsistent. There are two funds, the CCBF, the Building Fund, and the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. So both capital And of that, over half is the $2 million just on the capital side. So those funds can actually be held for future years. In the past, we would hold them and keep some money in case we needed additional funds or to save. Currently, all prior year funds have been committed as we've been trying to address our infrastructure needs now with the infrastructure funding gap. So certainly something, to just think about and be aware of the amount of grants and the work that certainly does go into those. But we're not entering, an environment right now where we expect that we're going to have a lot more grants coming from certainly our federal and provincial partners. Not to say that there won't be, and there'll be some different ones, but it's going to continue to be a challenge to try and bring in as much grant funding as we can to move forward things like capital and aspects of the financial or the strategic plan. Okay.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from the table? I've just got one, and that is just to what your last points were. I do wonder, with the addition of a part-time grant facilitator, is there an opportunity for us to be diversifying some of the grants that are being applied for? Is there an opportunity to be partnering with, for example, Loyalist College on some grant opportunities and or community entities to really widen the pool of grant opportunities that might be available to us?
I mean, a part-time person will allow us, certainly some opportunity to be able to expand. Part of it will depend on what grant opportunities are actually available out in the environment, right? And that will change, from time to time. So I know we have, we have a database that we subscribe to right now that, we look for, let's say less traditional, avenues. We still work. We still get information from Northumberland County's grant writer, who puts out a really good report of a whole bunch of grants, that are available. And certainly, if opportunities come up with community partners, we can look at each of those, as they arise. We still have to have resources, and our funding to be able to support any of the programs. But we do, as much as we can, and sometimes overextend ourselves, to be able to take those opportunities, because often they're pretty time limited, when they come up. So I mean, we'll be looking for all the opportunities we have, but part of it also, the challenge with grants is sometimes you can have a great year just because, the provincial government and the federal government are, coming out with, large amounts of grants, and other years you can put in a ton of effort and, it's, you've done better than you otherwise would have, right? So it's really hard. I'm very mindful to say like, oh, we did $1 million more this year, we did a better year. That doesn't necessarily mean we put in more effort, right? At the same time, I think it's important that you're aware on a summary basis of all of the different grants that we do have, because it is important, and it's an important aspect of our funding.
Yes, Councillor Todd.
Thank you. And I think the mayor raises a really interesting point and question about, as we bring the part-time grant writer on board, we have a significant amount of money that we divert from our budget into community grants. And if we can help the community members find money and whether that's through teaching them how to write grants, putting grants in front of them, that could wean them into other levels of funding outside of the municipality, which would help us. So there's probably some opportunity there to look at.
That's a amazingly excellent point, Councillor Todd. And I would also suggest that, going back to the educational thing, that one of the things that I haven't seen the database, but we have new doors open to us with having Loyalist College here in the municipality and really wanting to partner. So we have access to NSERC, SHRC, CIHR funding that is a whole other pile of funds that aren't traditionally accessed by municipalities, but could be accessed through partnerships with an educational institution. And some of those are extraordinarily large, long-term projects, and they can feed into also advancing a number of our policy priorities in the municipality. Councillor Mink?
Thank you. So through the chair, how many grants, I don't know if you can answer this question, but or how many grants in volume or dollar value do we not actually use, or do we use it all? Because just to expand on that, I know that sometimes we do apply for grants and the time is run out, or else we don't have the funding. Some of these grants require, for an example, we put in 100,000, we get a grant for 100,000, but then we have to commit 500 in order to fulfill that grant. So do they usually get fulfilled, or do we have to give up some of this grant money?
I mean, by and large, they get fulfilled. There are times, like certainly when we apply for a grant, there's always a balancing act between asking for more money and then trying to be successful in getting it. We have had times, where you're not able to spend all the money, within the scope, and so sometimes we don't. We don't, expend all the funds. But by and large, and for the larger dollar ones, I mean, those are our funding ones, our capital. We never return, any capital funding that we can use, broadly. At the same time, we also don't go out and start spending money just because it's, a grant. At the end of the day, we're all paying for it, just in a different way, right? So, but by and large, most grants are pretty laid out, and we expend the funds that we're able to,
Thank you. Can the recommended motion is listed on the agenda? Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Todd. All in favor? And that is unanimously passed. 4.5, report PD 0624, rural roles program. Does staff have anything further that they would like? Okay, yes, please, Director Davis.
Through the mayor to council. So I just certainly this is an update on the pilot program that I brought forward last year that we operated in the rural area. I would note that we didn't have a large amount of uptake on that program. However, I think ethically, I think we did good work. We brought people, most of that was related to medical appointments and bringing people from the rural space into either the hospital in Cobourg or medical appointments in town. And so I think it's an important thing to continue. In my opinion, it has zero, certainly there are costs associated to fuel and vehicle maintenance. I'm asking that we extend this program, don't call it a pilot, but continue the program until we have a more fulsome discussion for budget 2025 around common services and what that looks like. At that time would be a more appropriate time to sort of reevaluate this program, so to speak. What I did want to add also is I also threw into this application threw into this report recognizing that we have made application in the past. I believe it came forward in the 2022 or your 23 budget deliberations, grant funding to replace the current transit vehicles. I would note that in the fall, the Minister of Transportation visited this municipality and spoke about electric vehicle infrastructure, specifically for the Jack Burger Sports Complex. I would also recognize that in deliberations for 2023, a number of members of council spoke to electric vehicle options for our transit fleet. And so one of the things I'm seeking your approval tonight is that if we are successful, we expect that a decision will be made very soon on opportunity for new transit vehicles and support from the province to do so. Conversations with the Minister of Transportation indicate that that those decisions are coming and that they would look favorably if we would like to incorporate some form of EV element. I'm not suggesting that we have the infrastructure capacity or the funding to convert the entire fleet to electric vehicles. And what I am suggesting is, like a rural roads pilot, we may pilot some element of transit so that we get a better understanding of what that could look like on a more fully fledged electric program. So that is sort of why I've put that in today, is recognizing that is some of the requests that I've received from council in the past, and an opportunity may present itself to do so. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for that report. Questions, comments? Councillor Less.
Two questions. First of all, I assume they're planning to spend compared to options for 2023. Do you expect that to carry forward?
I can't gauge how many people are going to use transit. However, I expect it will be continue to be underspent this year. I'm not concerned that we're going to continue to offer services to the rural area will actually put us into a budget jeopardy position with regards to rural specialized transit. I appreciate the feedback.
Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So thank you for the report. I think, yeah, the numbers are low, but when we look at community care, rural to urban, that has been growing annually as well. So I think that this program, once people learn about it, we probably will have more usership. There are people that are aging in place more and more frequently. For medical reasons or for just cost of living, they cannot afford vehicles anymore or drive vehicles. So I think that this is a responsible choice. Question I have, which I don't know if you can answer, it would have been for Jeanette. So if you could bring it back. If you can't answer, maybe next meeting. I recall, and I don't know for sure, that the Rolls program at one point went up to Dale, and it may have went to Dale over to Welcome and back, and it was discontinued, I think maybe in 2018 or whatever. So that's one of my questions and concerns is why was it discontinued then? And how can we make sure that if we roll this out, that won't happen again for whatever reason? I don't know what that reason was.
So I couldn't answer with certainty because Director Davidson is not in attendance. However, I could game an answer a little bit. I would suspect that if we had a route that took you to Dale Road and returned, that would not be considered specialized transit. That would have been a more conventional form of transit because it's not a regular route. Specialized transit isn't a regular route. Specialized transit is booked by appointment. You have to qualify for the program and then you book the appointment, bring yourself in. And so maybe our catchment area went as far as Dale Road. I can't imagine why we wouldn't incorporate the entirety of the rural ward in that process. That being said, typically when we look at things, usership is not particularly high. I can't imagine that we would want to ask our rural residents to assume a percentage or a portion of the costs of operating that kind of a program if we don't see that there's going to be value for the residents. Although I would agree with you 100%. Part of the challenges we have with the current housing crisis in Ontario is seniors are aging in place. They need to be able to get into the community for important appointments, access to medical care, and retail requirements. And so, there's a world where this service only, in my opinion, is going to grow, not to decline. So we may start small, but I would imagine we will grow to a certain amount and we will grow incrementally over the next year or so.
Thank you for that report. I'm really excited about the exploration of the EV vehicle for the municipality, certainly in line with our strategic plan and, as you mentioned, discussions around this council table. I did want to ask, if we do at some point move into an on-demand transportation system for the municipality, how would it interface with this kind of program? Do you see it as complementary? Do you see it as overlapping? Do you see it as we would be able to realize cost savings because, in fact, there would be far more flexibility and options for people to move from the rural area to wherever they need to go to, whether it's medical appointments or retail services?
To the mayor, this is effectively an on-demand transportation. So that's what specialized transit is actually on-demand transit. Are you talking to, just to be clear, we have a conventional transit system that operates on routes. Are you suggesting that we may move from a routed system in the conventional space, or are you talking about sort of more on-demand transportation options like a ride-sharing program, et
Correct.
cetera,
I
et
should
cetera?
have used more precise language of ride sharing where you don't actually have to book ahead of time. You can just call and be
Okay.
more spontaneous.
So, appreciate, thank you for that. So just to be clear, so I mean, the rideshare kind of opportunity is on the, is equivalent to a taxi service, right? So it's a little bit different, and so certainly those systems can complement one another. I mean, the reality is I look at if we look at transportation or moving people from space to space, the costs associated with, we try to keep the cost low. Some of that comes from subsidization. Some of that comes from standardization. So the reality is, I think those programs could complement one another. A rural resident, as an example, could get we also are, part of standardization is we are constrained by time and people, right? So, if you wanted to come in from the rural area for instance, on specialized transit to dine in downtown Port Hope, as an example, that could be a possibility for somebody that qualifies for specialized transit. The issue is you may not finish your meal in time to take specialized transit home. And so that, I guess if I'm envisioning a world where that could happen, that would be a scenario that I could see something like that, that complementing one another, recognizing the fact that, quite frankly, as a senior on specialized transit, you're going to pay between $2 and $2.50 for a ride. And on rideshare, return trip home will be whatever it will be. I don't know, but it will certainly be more than $10 or $15, no different than community care service that's provided rural to urban, has a price tag attached to it that is much higher than our price tag. So not to say that we beat them on price every time and that's what we're going for, but I mean, I think that's the reality.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that the complementarity is very exciting, and the fact that we're talking about expanding the options for our residents in rural communities is also very timely in terms of the aging population and aging in place. So thank you very much. So the recommended action is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Mink. All in favor? That is passed. So the recommended action is that a bylaw be presented to council to execute an agreement. I'm jumping ahead. Item number 4.6, report PRC 0324 Report Hope Racket Club agreement. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick note, a fairly straightforward report. This is to execute an updated agreement with the Port Hope Racket Club. The club has been in existence since 2002, and the municipality has worked collaboratively with the club and has had an agreement in place since that time. They've been reviewed on a 5-year basis. This update to the agreement is establishing a longer term so that we can set the items in motion to be able to facilitate the Winter Tennis Dome project. So this is exclusively related to the use of the courts for summer and winter tennis. It is not related to the agreement about what the tennis dome programming and items would look like. That is anticipated to come in the future once those are established after staff and the club are able to negotiate those terms.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Any questions or comments from around the table? Okay, seeing none, the recommended action is that a bylaw be presented to council to execute an agreement between Port Hope Racket Club and the municipality of Port Hope for the term commencing May 1st, 2024 and ending April 30th, 2044. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Todd, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. We're now moving on to item 5, notice of motions. And yet again today, I'm passing on the chair to the Deputy Mayor.
I'm really earning my keep. So we have a notice of motion on the agenda. This was published on the previous meeting agenda to provide notice to council and the public that we would be discussing this item. Tonight is a notice of motion brought forward by the mayor, and so I will ask the mayor to speak to it.
Thank you very much. Before I actually, I mean, we sort of spoke about this at the last meeting, but between the last meeting and today's vote, I've received a number of questions from Councillor Todd that he has received in turn. I'm going to read these out regarding the Port Hope Clinic, and I'm just going to then address them as clearly and as simply as possible. So the questions are, whose initiative is this? It didn't come from council, staff, or through public delegation. Who is running it? How is it being funded? Will Port Hope taxpayers be asked to fund it? How are doctors being recruited? How will this recruitment effort impact our permanent doctor recruitment efforts? Who will be responsible if it fails? Will the cost of the lease remain with the county if a clinic closes prior to the lease expiring? The motion states that there are 4,000 Northumberland residents without a family doctor. Is the clinic only for Northumberland residents? How many Port Hope residents are without family doctors? Since the scope is Northumberland county-wide, is this then the county's responsibility, not Port Hope's? What does it mean to support and endorse? Is council holding the municipality to some sort of commitment? Will this council also lobby the provincial government to properly fund healthcare so we have enough doctors? So thank you for those questions. I think that for those of us who've been around this table over the last year, you've certainly heard updates from both myself and Councillor Andrews on the clinic, its development, the different steps that we have taken. So in some ways, if we do look at the Municipal Act and the role of council, both council and in particular the mayor of CO can participate and foster activities that enhance the economic, social, and environmental and well-being of the municipality and its residents. So even though this did not come through as a staff report, I think that Councillor Andrews and myself have been very actively involved literally from the day of election to try to reopen the clinic as part of something that we had committed as part of our platforms. Who is funding it? From the very beginning, the Port Hope District Port Hope and District Health Foundation came forward as a key funder of this initiative. They have committed the majority of funds for this. We've also had the Rotary Club of Port Hope commit significant funds to this. We have received a commitment in funding from the municipality of Cobourg for 3 years, running $15,000 a year for 3 years, and we have a commitment of Loyalist College for financial contributions for the clinic. The only hiccup we had in the process is who would actually take on the responsibility to be the leaseholder of the clinic. We solved that by going to the county. The county is taking responsibility for being the leaseholder on that clinic. They are confident that we have more than enough funding to cover our first year of operations. It is a pilot. There is no risk to the county. Probably the financial risk would lie with those who have fundraised for it should the clinic cease to exist. But given the interest and certainly the feedback we've received from other members of the community, we hope that the clinic will only grow and not fail in the first 10 months. But I mean, that's who's going to be at risk. In terms of how this affects our recruitment of doctors, I sit on the West Northumberland Physician Recruitment Committee. There's unanimous support at that committee for this walk-in clinic, understanding that we've had zero success in recruiting any of the 4 needed doctors we need right now in the community. And chances are that by the end of 2025, we're going to lose another 10 doctors from across Northumberland County. So the situation is absolutely dire. The physicians that we're trying to recruit are out of medical schools. We're looking at other routes of foreign trained doctors and how we can upskill them into these positions. The doctors that are coming forward for the clinic or have in the past are doctors that are working already in either other communities with other kinds of jobs where Councillor actually Adam was kind enough to recommend a doctor friend of his who does work in the north that's available to come into the community to take on certain shifts and certain hours. And we have doctors from outside of Port Hope who, as a matter of a commitment to public health, believe that the right to health care, the right to primary care is a right that every citizen of the county has. If we look at the data prior to our clinic that operated, it closed during COVID. If we look at the data of who was going to that clinic, it was approximately a third of folks from Port Hope, a third from Cobourg, and a combination of others from the rest of the county and outside of the county. But just as much as Bowmanville Clinic has said to me, please open up your own clinic because all of your folks are coming to Bowmanville, we wouldn't turn anybody away from the clinic. The county has stepped up. They are taking responsibility. We continue to advocate from the county table to the province for restructuring the healthcare system. We continue to work with the OMA on their priorities, on the need for funding. There's a new funding deal in place between the federal government and the provincial government of $3.1 billion. There's a chance that some of this will trickle into the community, but that's going to take time, and we don't know what that's going to mean in terms of the long term. So this is a Band-Aid solution as we, of course, continue to advocate for change. And the support and endorse that I'm asking for at this table is simply to indicate to the county that we are very grateful that they are taking on the responsibility of the lease. We are very grateful to the community organizations in Port Hope that have stepped up and who are providing funding. And, you know, Rotary Port Hope is doing an exclusive fundraiser on March 2nd for the clinic. And it's a way to say that we acknowledge and that we appreciate that. And also it is a reflection of an acknowledgement of the work that Councillor Andrews and I have done over the last year. I just want to turn it over to Councillor Lass if you want to add anything.
The process has been quite interesting. The money was not an issue to fund this organization. We got more than enough to handle the first year. The issue came in, of all places, the CRA, and how they allowed charitable organizations to direct their money to a for-profit entity, meaning the walk-in clinic. The doctors are going to make money out of it. And as they should. I mean, they put the time in, they should make some money. But so the CRA had some rules in place that miraculously at the 11th hour, a new legislation has been vetted, and there is now a direct line on how we can get money from Port Hope Healthcare Foundation, who's going to be the bank, to the walk-in clinic to cover leases and the equipment and the supplies and everything that goes along with running the clinic. So that was a godsend. The county came on board, and I've always had issues with the county from where I sit as a councillor here, and I was blown away at the spirit of cooperation from Jennifer and Glendees and their staff. I mean, we've got their IT people involved. We've got a lawyer involved from them that are working very hard on our behalf to get this clinic going. And today we went into the building. It's going to be on Toronto Road where the CHC is. And the offices, there's 3 exam rooms fully ready to go. It was a walk-in clinic a while back. It's at Alana's strong arm people to do some decorating in it, fully equipped. We have a nurse practitioner that is working on a part-time basis to get us up and running. I've recruited my wife, who ran the walk-in clinic for 17 years, to work with Glenn Dees to outline what type of triage nurse we need in reception. Everything's coming together. And today we met, and I can't really talk too much about this without their approval, but we have another organization that has jumped in that's going to provide us IT support to get ourselves up and running for the billing part and everything. So it's been just a wonderful experience. Now the clinic is going to be county-wide. Okay, we have no restrictions on who can use it. We want to attract unrostered patients, those that don't have doctors, but we won't turn anybody away. The issue with a rostered patient, somebody that's already got a doctor coming to the walk-in clinic, is that doctor will be penalized financially for this patient going to the walk-in. That's not our rules. That's the government rules, and that's another can of worms that's been going on for quite some while. But in the past, 40% of the people that use the walk-in clinic came from Port Hope, 30% roughly from Cobourg, 30% from Trenton, Brighton, Grafton, Peterborough, Bowmanville, off the highway. So, we serviced everybody. Peak at the former walk-in clinic at Christmas time was 110 patients in the day. So we don't know what the volume is going to look like. There is a lot of pent-up demand. We figure 40 to 50 to start with. We're going to start on a very modified basis. It's not going to be 7 days a week. We're going to start Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday hours to see where we're at, and then we'll see what we go from there. What happens after the year? The Healthcare Foundation is going to be using it as their main fundraising objective. And we get a lot of bequests, and we get some donations on a regular basis to the foundation. So we're going to have to step that up. I would encourage like the people that use it, I hope they're benevolent enough to want it to continue and put a buck or two into the kitty when they can. So that's pretty well what I have.
Thanks, Les. And just to clarify a couple of points. One is that the fundraising that has been done for the clinic is only for the operation of the clinic. So things like lease, administrative support, computers, medical supplies. The doctors are billing OHIP. The doctors are not being paid through this fundraising effort. They're billing OHIP as any other doctor would. We are not requiring any kind of user fees for that clinic, just to be super clear. And in terms of billing, both rostered and unrostered patients can show up on the weekends. There's a special billing code that even a rostered patient can come on a weekend and not have their primary care physician dinged. So right now we're talking about 8 hours of access to care during the week that we are really trying to target unrostered patients to be able to access, and that's the initial goal.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Todd?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to both of you for that information. I think it's really helpful, and I think it's really important that the community sees the transparency of the work that you folks have been doing, and also just a thank you to you and also the people who have been supporting this behind the scenes, and the other organizations that are involved. I think it's going to be an important project.
Councillor Adam?
Well, through the chair, thank you, Councillor Todd, for saying exactly what I wanted to say. You just had your hand up first. Thank you to both of you. I know how much work you put into it. Les and I get to speak frequently, and he's explained how much work is going into this. So thank you both. Appreciate it.
Councillor Mink?
Thank you. So through the chair, I also echo what has been said. Thank you for the work that you have done. We definitely have. It's not unknown that we have a doctor shortage. Many people in our community do not have access to medical care, do not get the diagnoses and the treatments that they need. One question I had, I think you had said Cobourg contributed 15,000. I don't recall Port Hope contributing anything. So two questions on that. how did that 15,000 come about? And if this is something that's going to continue and be open to all of Northumberland, is there a plan for making a case to those municipalities for future funding?
That's a great question, Councillor Mink. So that initial initiative came prior to the county becoming involved in it, and the discussion was that we had put in the time and the effort from the council table, and so others could be putting in a financial contribution. But the county, obviously, in being involved, will at some point may or may not be financially involved, in which case it would be from that level. It wouldn't be the only health related project or initiative that the county is involved in. But again, we're really focusing on a 1-year pilot, seeing how it's going to work. We're waiting to see whether advocacy efforts pay off, whether there's additional funding for additional kind of medical teams or primary care teams. I mean, who knows what that's going to be. But at this point, to be clear, there's never been an ask of this municipality for any financial resources, and there's no plans to ask for any financial resources over this next year for the pilot.
Any other questions or comments? I'll just add my 2 cents. I was an unrostered patient for the first year and a half or so that I was in this community, and I remember being so grateful for the walk-in clinic, especially when I was 8 months pregnant, sick with 2 little kids in tow, and thinking, where else, like, what would I have done if that walk-in clinic hadn't been here? And I've been thinking about that a lot over the last few years since it ceased to exist. Without any other points of discussion, then we have a motion as printed on the agenda. Not printed on the agenda is that the motion is seconded already by Councillor Less. So I'll call the vote. All in favor? Carried.
Thank you very much. That will be nice to share with the county tomorrow. Moving on to updates and new business. Just a couple things to share. Last week, we shared that we awarded phase 2 of the Walton Street reconstruction project to Clearway Construction. Phase 2 of the project will focus on reconstructing Walton Street between Queen Street and Cavan Street. The approved budget for the second phase of the Walton Street reconstruction project is $6,409,000. The bid awarded falls within the budget allotted for this project. Staff are currently collaborating with Clearway Construction to finalize the construction schedule. To keep the public informed and involved, a public information session is planned for late March or early April. We will provide you with more details about this session once the date is confirmed. And also, Deputy Mayor has one other update that she would like to share.
Oh, thank you. Yes, just a reminder, this Saturday evening is the annual Coldest Night of the Year event taking place here in Port Hope. And there are well over 200 registered walkers again this year, which is fabulous. And I'm pleased to be joining a group of staff who have put together a Municipality of Port Hope team for this year's event. So we're working together to fundraise, and that's with representatives from three across 3 different departments of the municipality. So we'll be there in our matching toques, and I look forward to seeing many of our neighbors there too.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Mink? Oh,
Sorry,
yes.
if you have more, go ahead. But I have a
No,
question.
no, please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So just to follow up question to what you had said about Walton Street. I have a lot of questions coming to me about the plan, and I know it's coming, but ask staff if you could provide a little bit more information just to communicate that to the public.
Of course, thank you for the question. So obviously this project is of keen interest to all of the business owners and stakeholders down on Walton Street, as well as the general community, visitors, tourists, and of course municipal staff. Behind the scenes, staff are working diligently on a plan, a robust plan that is going to assist the business owners as much as we possibly can during we're trying to frame it in a way that there's an opportunity with this construction, with the infrastructure being renewed and being able to leverage it with positive messaging and how we can leverage it through an economic development lens. That said, the plan isn't completely put together yet and all the details aren't known, but once known, staff report is going to come forward to council with clear laid out steps as to how staff are going to be leveraging the contractor, third parties, summer students, our comms team, et cetera, to ensure that the public is engaged. The PIC obviously is not going to be in a council forum. It will be in a different format. But that said, staff feels it's important to come back to council with a robust plan so you completely understand exactly what's happening, including some construction details, communications, engagement, and how we're going to be assisting the business owners. So stay tuned. That'll come forward once all put together. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. We're now moving into question period. Remember, question period is for questions only and is an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions of council. Please keep your questions direct. Please note, this is not meant to be an avenue to ask questions to staff. If you have questions specifically for your council members, you can ask them now. So if you've got some questions, please step up to the podium, identify yourself, provide us please with your name and address, and press the purple button, please. I think that we got all the questions with Councillor Mink asking about Walton Street before we go to the public, and I don't see anybody from the media here. So Ed, you can definitely come up if you wanted to ask a question.
Hi, Ed White, Mill Street. First of all, thanks guys for the walk-in clinic thing. That's a lot of hard work. I understand that. You guys did a great job. We'll see if it comes to fruition. That's awesome. That's the good. Now the question. I'm not completely understanding if option 1B, the allow anybody to apply for the council seat, how would that be vetted? How would that be vetted? Who would be doing the looking through? So if you got 50 applications, who would be looking through that? Would that be staff or would that be council that would be looking through that? Would there be any cost involved in that vetting of people? If it's vetted by staff, does that mean that you guys wouldn't get to vote or get to appeal or apply on everyone that applied? Only a few that applied, or whoever was in charge? Would there be a cost for people to apply for this position? Would there be a pass on the cost for those that paid for the last election? They already paid their money for the vote. Would they get a pass or would they have to pay again? I guess that's enough for now. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's numerous questions. I'm sorry, I'm not in a position to answer those from where I'm sitting, but I'm wondering if the clerk would like to procedurally, I'd like to.
I'm not going to try to answer the procedural question.
Yep.
The short answer, I think, Ed, is that while those are great questions, they're also moot because we did not vote for that option. So that's not what we're doing. We voted for option 1A to appoint the third place candidate from the 2022 election.
It's still fair to ask to answer those procedural questions in case that were to come back up. But just wanted to be clear that that's not the path that we've decided to go down.
No, but I do think that given that there is 2 weeks between what we decided today and a final council decision, we haven't made a final council decision. We passed a motion. So I think the questions you raise are very legitimate, and I would like to hear if the clerk can provide some general comments back to you.
Yeah, I will do my best to answer all of those questions. I was trying to write them all down, Ed. So in terms of how the applications would be vetted, it's based on the Municipal Act. There is a requirement for certain qualifications. You have to be an elector. You have to not be prohibited by voting. You have to submit an application. All of that information would be public and would be available for review. Office of the Clerk staff would be available if interested applicants would have questions, and we'd be happy to assist them with that as well. A lot of that information is included in the procedures appendix document. It's not included in the body of the actual staff report, but it is in the procedures document. That's one of the appendices, which is, I believe, Appendix C. So that would be one that I would welcome you to review, because a lot of the questions would be answered there. And then in terms of who would be doing the review, clerk staff would be doing an initial review just to ensure that all of the legislative requirements were met. So we would be passing those applications onto the council for their review. If there are ones that did not meet the legislative requirements, then that would also be, they would not qualify in that situation.
Okay, given that, let's say 20 people pass all the regulations, they're Ward 2 residents, they don't have criminal records, they, all the municipal laws that they have to go through. How then would there be a decision on how to vote on these people? If it's not open to, like, if it's a council, if it were to be a council decision, how would they vote? What would the criteria be on 20 people? Like, I don't understand what the, hi, I'm Bill, I live in Ward 2. Oh, okay,
So council is welcome to
I just don't,
provide
I don't
that.
understand that particular
Yeah.
process at
Yeah.
all. If then now you tell me it's not even up for option anymore, so I will motor away.
Yeah, no, Ed, it is, because we haven't made a final decision. We passed a motion today, and the process by which we would be considering applicants could be informed by questions from our constituents. Their presentations could be shaped by priorities that constituents have said that they'd like to hear in a presentation. And as we talked about earlier, all of that would be done in public, including the presentation. And then there would be a pause where the constituents could give feedback on the performance of those that have come forward. And then the council would be making a decision on who would be successful.
Okay.
And is there a cost involved? Back to you, clerk.
Yeah,
in-
so as the report states, there would be a cost of approximately $2,000 just for communication purposes for that process.
But for the individual applicants going forward?
Well, I really can't answer that question. It really is dependent on what the applicant decides to do in terms of the kind of presentation they create, or if they want to do any outreach. That's really up to the applicant. But for applying for that position, there is no cost. So
What's the $2,000?
the $2,000 is for communication purposes for the call for applications process, so that we can actually advertise it to Ward 2 and invite the
Okay,
applications
so
to come
that's
in.
the cost, that's
it's
a cost support hope, not
yeah,
to each individual.
That's correct.
Oh,
That's
okay.
correct.
I was gonna say, that'll cut them down, won't it? All right, thanks.
Yeah, so just to be clear, there's no cost for the applicants, but the cost that was in the report about what the cost would be to the municipality would be approximately $2,000 in order to correct staff time, communications, and all the other things that would be related with the mechanisms of that process.
Good evening, Dan James of County Road 10, and welcome. My question pertains to the current bylaw that states that you don't have to be a Ward 1 resident to become a Ward 1 councillor, or you don't have to be a Ward 2 resident to become a Ward 2 resident. The bylaw states that you could be appointed or you could be elected either way. In good faith, based on conversation with the councillors, it was stated that you would be for appointing or going through a by-election for a Ward 2 representative resident. That's all well and said in good faith, but I'm wondering if the council would consider an amendment or a change to the current bylaw stating that they would change that bylaw, that it becomes mandatory that if the vacant seat is current in a Ward 2 position, it must be a Ward 2 resident, and thus for protecting Ward 1 as well, based on a bias and the proxy vote system that we go in with a ward system council.
Thank you for that question, and I'm going to turn it over to the clerk.
So Madam Mayor, I'm just going to turn it over to Director Gilmer to provide some context with respect to that question.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one we get on a sort of semi-regular basis. It's not a requirement of Port Hope. It's a requirement of provincial legislation. So the Municipal Act speaks very clearly to an eligible elector being allowed to run in any ward they so choose. You do not need to live in the ward you run in. So it's a requirement of the province, not the municipality of Port Hope.
Thank you for the clarification. I'll hold my last question. Thanks.
Are you sure? Okay. Councillor Todd has a follow-up question.
Yeah, sorry, I have a follow-up question for Brian. So if it's mandated that way, if we were to have chosen the option where people can apply, obviously Ward 1, Ward 2, people could apply, would it be then illegal to remove the Ward 1 and disqualify them?
I don't believe council would have the authority to prescribe additional requirements. As the clerk noted earlier, the key to a bylaw is to conduct it sort of as closely to a regular election as possible. The regular legislation covering the Municipal Elections Act, again, prescribes that the resident does not have to live in the ward they run in. Council wouldn't have the option to supersede that provincial legislation.
I see the follow-up question.
Now I'll ask my second question. In the case that, say it was appointed or by election chose a Ward 1 resident or representative for the seat of a Ward 2 council, would the proxy vote still be in place when that option is given to those two councillors? Because then you have a resident that could be biased in that situation, having a dual purpose vote.
I think the answer is the weighted vote you're referring to, not the proxy vote, but the weighted vote runs with the office of the councillor. Whoever is filling that vacancy will have 2 votes on a variety of issues.
And I have a follow-up, and so does Councillor Mink. The same rules then also apply for a by-election, that anybody from Ward 1 or Ward 2 could be running in a by-election, correct? Under the same rules and regulations. Thank you. Councillor Mink?
Thank you. I don't have a question. I just want to make a comment because this is getting a lot of attention, and I think a lot of feedback is based on that fear that a Ward 1 person will end up in that Ward 2 seat. And and I think making decisions, we shouldn't be making a decision based on something fear. That's not what drives us is fear. I want to make the point though that Ward 2 people can run in Ward 1 as well. There is nothing stopping 5 Ward 2 people from sitting up here. You have that same opportunity in the next election. So I understand the feelings of misrepresentation, but it does work both ways. So I just want to make that clear.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
John Bickle, 4709 County Road 2. Just wondering, what's the staff and financial implications of putting a brand new person in that chair? I know there's got to be a certain amount of training and things go on. What's the cost of that? Does anybody know?
We currently don't have an estimate on that cost. Council has a professional training plan in place, and we will continue on that. The incoming councillor, however they're chosen, will be part of that professional development plan, and there will be some resources that will be expended to bring them up to date. Some of that will be staff resources, some of that will be courses that they need to take. So we will have to review that once the person is in place.
Deputy Mayor.
I think that's a good question. John, thank you for asking it. And it is one of the things that I actually considered in terms of appointment or versus by-election. And I see that actually as one of the advantages of the appointment route. Because as you could see, even just from today's meeting with the budget roadmap, there's going to be a lot of training of council in the months between now and June related to next year's budget, right? There's also other trainings that our new CAO has on the docket for things that we need refreshers on. The PHAI is a big one, and that will be coming up, and that will be, I believe, before June. So one of the advantages of the appointment is that we'll have a person in that seat by the end of March, which means they'll be a part of all of those trainings that are coming up and won't be, in that deficit and having to be retrained the same way as if we didn't have someone there joining us until the summer, where they'd not only be behind on training, but even behind on things like the budget.
Thank you, and those are all great points. We are very grateful to the CAO for putting together a very robust professional development plan for the council. But one thing that I do want to distinguish is that some of those things that are going to be happening are, of course, very important for all of our professional development. But I would think that whatever appointment process is in place, that the person coming in is going to need some other basic training and professional development supports in addition to that, which we've got planned over the coming months.
Well, good evening, Mayor Hangvinsky and members of council. Just quickly, I just wanted to mention that I had the opportunity recently to correspond with Julia Snoke about the salmon working group. And although I was disappointed I couldn't join the group, I understand why and look forward to seeing what comes out of the working group. And I just wanted to thank you for your prompt responses to my questions. It's very appreciated. My question, actually this came up a couple of times tonight, relates to the strategic plan for Port Hope. So I did a search online and found one that seemed to cover 2019 to 2022. And there was the most recent report on how we were tracking to it was from September 2022. So I'm just wondering if there is a current strategic plan and how we're tracking.
Can I please ask again for your name and address?
Yes, sorry, I should have started with that. My name is Rob Argue and I live at 13 Corbett Street.
Okay.
It's Argue, the same way it sounds, ARG.
Yeah. Thank you for the feedback, and thank you for the really important question regarding our strategic plan. We do have a draft draft of the new strategic plan, but in terms of where we are in the process of finalizing, and I'm going to turn it over to our CAO.
Sure, thank you. And just to follow up with the professional development for council, I would just like to ensure that the clerk here gets her due, as she has been instrumental in putting that program together as well. So thank you, Shrishma, for that. Yes, so council did receive a draft report. They have deliberated and identified a number of strategic pillars. It has sat in draft form, waiting for me to show up. So essentially, they have tasked the new CEO, being myself, to ensure that that gets moved forward. I have met one-on-one with each member of council when I arrived, and we're looking to see it coming forward the end of March, early April for their consideration and final adoption.
All right, thank you.
I believe the deputy mayor would like to add a comment.
For your interest on the salmon fishing issue, there is also a community roundtable that has convened twice already and has another meeting coming up that I've been meeting with that is finalizing some community input that will be going to the working group. So if that's something that would be of interest to you, I'm happy to connect with you so that you can join that discussion forum as well.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. I'll talk to you after.
Okay, here we go. This, I think, might be the final question. Yes.
Jim Sculthorpe, 1685 Willow Beach Road. Did I miss a date for the discussion, or when you're going to bring forward what's happening on the main street? Because I get asked all the time, what's happening, what's happening? Is there a date that I can, when somebody asks me, I can say, council's going to present the plan on?
Thank you for that. I think we touched on that earlier, but I'll let the CAO give a more robust answer to this.
Thank you for your question. So the project has been awarded just recently. We have scheduled a kickoff meeting with the construction contractor. As soon as that meeting has taken place, we'll be able to determine what date it's the plan that I was speaking to previously will come forward to council with all of the fulsome details. But we haven't even had the kickoff meeting yet with the contractor. So it's a good question, a little bit premature, but we'll ensure that the community and council is kept up to date.
Because spring is coming very
I'm
soon.
aware. I'm aware. Thank you.
Second question. I personally was quite disappointed at council meeting when I didn't have an opportunity to ask a question. I understand why council have put their program so that I have to know the question I want to ask multiple days before question or before council meeting. But I think it's going to be very challenging for our municipality, the people of our municipality, not to have the opportunity to stand up the way we are tonight at council and only at committee of the whole. And that's my opinion. But
thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to just comment very briefly and just say that we're still in a new process. It's a shift in how we're doing things. The intention is not to reduce, but actually increase community engagement. And the reason the questions stay with the committee of the whole is this is the meeting where we're actually discussing and debating issues that then come forward to council for an approval process. So that was really the thinking behind it, but I'd like to turn it over to our clerk to amplify that answer.
I just want to make one point of clarification. So with respect to the deputation process, that's the process where, residents have an opportunity to address council on a matter that is on the agenda. And in terms of when they can do that, they have until noon, I believe, the day before the meeting to register for that. So they have quite a bit of time. The agenda is usually published on the Thursday prior, but they have until Monday to register for a deputation.
But you're asking them to look at the agenda and formulate a question and ask it. So many times, for me in particular, I may come to council or committee of the whole with a question, but listening to our council debate creates an opportunity for us to formulate a very important question for our municipality. But I don't have an opportunity then to ask that until it comes to committee of the whole, which is a week later. Please answer the question, Brian. You're looking at me like that. Sorry.
I'm just speaking to the fact that now is an opportunity to pose those questions. And with respect to the issues that come forward at council, the intention is that the debate's taking place at committee of the whole. There will be a debate at council as well. And should a member of the public wish to speak to that item before council considers it, because that is a huge change and something we've heard for years, they have that opportunity now. All they have to do is let us know they're coming to speak.
I can say I'd like to speak at council, but I don't have to say what I want to speak about. Okay. Thank you. I realize this is a new process and we have to get used to it and understand how to work with it.
And like all processes, we want to give it some time. And like all processes, over a period of time, we can always revisit, evaluate, and think about new ideas and ways moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, there is one more question, please.
Hi, Sarah from Welcome. Quick question. Keeps coming up in topic about community outreach, and it seems like it's just kind of stalemated in the same thing. Same thing with the property standards bylaw that's up for review right now, and I mean a couple other issues. So my question would be, has it been looked to outside municipalities to what they're doing? Is there such things as community outreach committees? Is there something more in depth we could be doing to kind of get that community notice out there as a collaborative group?
Really terrific question. It's, community outreach, engagement, communication are all things that we regularly talk about at this table, we grapple with, and I know that our staff is continually trying to make improvements in this regard. But if any of the if the CAO wants to add anything to that answer, or if anybody else would like to add anything to the answer, I think that the short answer from the table here is that we're very aware. It's something that we would like to see improvements on. It's something that I know that staff is aware of, and it's going to take some time for that to really gel.
I wouldn't mind adding a few comments. Community engagement and consultation and meaningful engagement and consultation is something that's very important to the municipal staff and council. One thing that we do grapple with is we have a very effective communications team that are constantly putting out different messaging in different ways and ensuring that we're able to connect with the residents. And a lot of time it's topic driven. Some topics are really easy to engage with the community on because the community is more aware or they're just more interested. But my ask of the community is to always be interested. And when you are always interested and you always want to know about the community in which you live, and I always use the KISS principle, when you kiss somebody and you make a connection, you go 80% and then the person comes 20. That's what I ask from the community. So if we do 80% of the work, then we ask our community members and our residents to do 20% so that they're always engaged and they're not just engaged when an issue affects them. And when they start to learn where and how we communicate as a corporation with our valued residents, whether that's social media, website, flyers around town, surveys, myporthope.ca, community bulletin boards. We have staff positioned all over the community that are always willing to answer questions, that the opportunity always exists. And there's always an engagement mechanism in place every day. It's just when and if our residents will take us up on it. Do we get it right every time? Do we get it perfect every time? No. We are constantly improving and constantly working at it, but we need our residents to work with us. And when there is an engagement opportunity, that they take us up on it and they let their voice be heard every time, not just when it's an issue that impacts them in their backyard or next door, because we are all community members and your voice is important. You've seen council grappling this evening on a very important discussion. We heard them multiple times say, I didn't hear, I don't know what the residents want. You know, so it's very, very important to come that 20% all the time. But I take your feedback. Please know that it's a constant internal conversation. But there's a lot of effort and a lot of conversation and a lot of resources that occur in this building and all of our buildings every single day to try to connect with our residents. It's not lost on us.
And I thank you for that very detailed answer. And it wasn't in regards to it being lost. It's just more coming as a community member. Is there something more that certain individuals could be doing in the community to help you guys get your voices out there and heard? And that's why I mainly brought up, you know, maybe a community outreach committee. I don't know how those work, but something along that lines. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that feedback, and maybe in the short order, bring a friend. You know, bring some friends, and we'll expand who's in the council chambers. Thank you for that. So, seeing no other questions from the public, this concludes our business to be covered on today's agenda, and I'm in a position to adjourn the meeting. Committee of the whole is adjourned. Thank you, and it is 9:43 p.m.